So this happened on 2 occasions in a sort of vice versa way. The first time was from my dad's perspective, and the second time from mine. It all happened when I was in high school, so about 6 years ago. My dad and I would get home and would sometimes get home at around the same time if I didn't have cheerleading practice, but it wasn't often. This time my dad had made it home first and inherently knew that he was the only one home because my car was not there yet. He recalls doing as he normally would when he got home. Usually this entails going out to our first floor bathroom, and he was in there when he says that he heard me come through the garage door, drop my keys off, unload my lunchbox and grab a snack. He heard me run up the stairs, which is a very distinct sound, only amplified by our older poorly built house, and heard my bedroom door close. He figured that it was me, obviously, and once he got out of the bathroom and walked to the stairs, he called up to me. My bedroom is right by the stairs, but the door is sort of out of sight if you're looking from the bottom of them. Often, I'm able to talk to someone downstairs from my bedroom, which is why when he heard me respond to him, it was normal for me to have my door closed and not to have to peek out. He said that he asked me if I had practice later, to which my voice responded, "No, I do not." Now, the stairs are sort of set up where the end is right by the garage door, and as he stood there and listened to me respond, I suddenly walked in behind through the garage door. I came in and my dad was instantly pale-faced and asked me if I had come in earlier. I said no because obviously I hadn't, and he said, "But I was just talking to you upstairs." We go upstairs and my door is open, and obviously nobody is there. Now, the second time we experienced this, I was the first one home and heard him come through the garage door and go straight to the bathroom. I was in my room at the time, sitting on my bed, so I was going off of what I was hearing rather than seeing, the same as he had done before. Needless to say, I called down to him saying hello, and he said hello back before I heard the sound of the garage door open and close. I really thought nothing of it at the time, but got up to sit at my desk, which was facing the window. I found his car not in the driveway, which was odd. There's no way that he could fit his car in the garage itself, as it's a work van. I look around to make sure that he didn't park on the street somewhere. I texted my dad asking if he was home yet, and he said no, not yet, and that he was almost there. I waited till he got home and I didn't leave my room, and I told him about what had happened. Now, originally one would think that somebody else was in our house, like an intruder or whatever, except in order to be coming in from the garage into the house, they would have had to have reopened the garage door that I had just closed. We had a garage door app at that time and have multiple security cameras, which I checked what time I closed the garage door and the time that I arrived home via the cameras, and it was the same. The door hadn't been opened since, and looking at the cameras, no one had walked anywhere near our property. My entire life I had a debilitating fear that someone would break into our house when I was home alone, hence the cameras, the garage door, and other security measures. But this spooked me for a long time. But when my dad and I connected our two stories, I came to realize that it may have been something a little more paranormal than crime. This story is something that I think about from time to time, and it really creeps me out. I'm sharing this to get it off my chest, because I think it's finally time to share it. So almost 3 years ago, I was 17 years old, and at this point, I was accustomed to being in horrible situations, as all I had was my mother, and she could not hold down a job for long because she had her own issues to tackle, and so, as I grew up, we stayed in and out of roommates' houses. We never really had a place of our own to stay, except twice, I guess, but That didn't last long either, and we would be forced into a new environment with a snap of a finger. So when I was 17, we were led into a situation where we were going to be homeless again, and I was used to it at this point as I'd slept in the street more than I'd like to say, but the day comes when we have to leave our roommate's house, and my mum is able to stay at her boyfriend's trailer. I had nowhere to go as I had no friends at this point, as I halted my friendships because they were bad for my health and mental state and overall were pretty toxic. My mum offered me to go with her, but I didn't want to as I felt like getting between my mum and her boyfriend was kind of weird. Plus, I'm used to the street and I didn't think it was that bad at that time. So, here we are. I get dropped off at a McDonald's and I eat some burgers before I go off into the streets once more. Eventually, the sun fled and darkness was all that remained, and so I looked for a place to sleep for the night. I went into many places that night, trying to sleep, but none of them were working because it was either too hot or the lights were too bright or the mosquitoes were biting me. That's when I remember a house that I used to go into to chill in. This house was under construction and nearly finished, so the doors all shut and the windows were all settled, so there were no mosquitoes. I go through the back like always and I make my way upstairs. Eventually I settle into the bathroom because there's less debris on the floor. So I lay there and I try to sleep. Eventually I hear some sounds downstairs, but I didn't think too much of it. I figured it was the door that I came through swinging open and closed or something. Eventually, after laying there for maybe an hour, I would guess, I open my phone and I look at some old photos of my life, thinking about how messed up it was that I got to this point and how I lost everything. The noises were still happening this entire time, but I paid no mind to it. Eventually, for whatever reason, I get up and I go and sit down on the back porch because I just couldn't sleep. I make my way downstairs and at the back door to the porch. I'm messing around on my phone for maybe 5 minutes when it happens. I see movement to my left from the back door that I just exited from. I glance over and time itself just freezes. At first I think it's an illusion, but I was in fact wrong. I see a man shrouded in darkness peering past the wall inside to gaze at me. His lower self of his figure was behind the wall entirely, and I could not see anything but his upper body at this point. Almost like the man was trying not to let me see his full body as it would make his presence known. The man was a pure black silhouette, and I couldn't make out any features at this point. After noticing him, I just sort of sat there and stared at him for what seemed like forever, but was probably a minute or two. I expected him to come outside and talk to me because I normally talk to a lot of homeless people and I thought the man was just homeless. He didn't come outside though. In fact, he hadn't moved at all. He was weirdly as still as a statue. He was very quiet too. Maybe if I hadn't have noticed him, he would have stared at me the entire time. I eventually, after staring at him for some time, got up and got on my bicycle and made my way out of the property. As I'm walking out of the backyard, I peer into the window that is next to the door that I saw the man in. The moonlight revealed the man was still there, only now he was watching me walk out of the property. I could tell as well because the moonlight revealed the top of the man's head, and I saw his left eye gazing at me. He was a white male who was quite tall and had a jacket of some kind on. I couldn't make out many details because he was still cloaked in darkness. After seeing this, I just moved a little faster out of there. I got to the front of the house on the street, and I looked inside to see if I could see him again, but I couldn't. I got on my bicycle and waved goodbye to the house because I figured the man was still watching me. Then I just rode away. For the rest of the night, I really couldn't sleep. I tried 2 different spots, but both were no luck. And this is pretty much where the story ends. I know I didn't have a crazy chase or a fight to the death or anything, but this actually happened, and it was very eerie and weird. I don't know what the man was doing in there. I assume that he was just trying to sleep like I was, but I don't know. The way he was staring at me was very unnerving. It makes me wonder too, just how long the man was in that house for, and what would have happened if I actually fell asleep in that house. Would he have just stared at me while I was asleep, completely blinded to his presence? Or did he have other intentions? I guess I'll never really know, but these days I don't go into houses like that anymore, at all, after this experience. This happened to me probably about 6 years ago now. To set the scene too, I was camping with about 5 other friends along the South Holston River in the Appalachian Mountains of East Tennessee. It was probably around 2 a.m. when this happened. Me and one of my friends, we slept in a couple of hammocks, while the rest of the group was split up into a couple of tents that were maybe 15 feet away. I was the only one awake at that time, but I was just about to fall asleep, when suddenly I hear this insane noise. It sounded like a man letting out a loud, deep scream at the top of his lungs, as if he was in pain. At first, it sounded about 20 feet away, but I heard it move extremely quickly through the middle of the campsite, right between where I was sleeping and where my friends in the tents were. It was just a few feet from me as it went by. Once it passed through the camp, the noise just stopped. It only lasted maybe 3 to 4 seconds. Also, despite the fact that whatever making the noise was clearly moving through the camp very quickly, there was no sound of like hurried footsteps, leaves crunching, or anything like that to indicate that something was actually there moving. It was really only the sound of screaming. Whatever it was, it woke everyone up and we were all pretty terrified, having no idea what it was. We all got up at this point and looked around camp, but there was no sign of anything passing through. We thought that maybe it was a type of bird since there were no footsteps, but none of us have been able to find any bird from the area that makes anywhere near the sound that we heard that night. Our first theory was a screeching owl, but we looked up what their calls sound like, and it definitely wasn't one of those. We all agreed that it sounded like a man, but it was way too fast for a person. We thought maybe something like a deer, a bear, or a mountain lion, but we would have undoubtedly heard some footsteps if it was. We're completely out of theories at this point, and we have no idea what to think about it, which is why I'm here. Does anyone have any thoughts on what could possibly explain what we heard? So I, a 25-year-old female, have a husky that I walk around my quiet neighborhood and brush outside for obvious reasons. Yesterday, around 3 p.m., I'm standing in my front driveway brushing my dog when I turn around to see a complete stranger, a grown man, standing behind me. He begins by asking me if he can say hi to my dog because he's seen me around a lot. And already I'm hesitant, but I allow it. At this time, I notice that he's on FaceTime with his phone pointing at me too. Then he tells me that he just moved here from South Africa and bought the house at the end of the road. That's been abandoned for like over a year now and was never posted for sale. He starts asking me if I'm 16 because he likes 16-year-olds, following up with, "Are you alone right now? Is this your house? Is this your car? Do you live alone? Are you around often?" etc. I politely say that I'm not willing to answer questions like that and tell him that he should leave at this point. He then walks into the woods across the street, coming back 15 minutes later, attempting to invite himself into my house and asking more questions this time, along the lines of, "Do you lock your doors, and are you alone at nighttime?" getting upset with me for saying that I do not want him on my property, and I would be calling our cop neighbor to come outside if he didn't leave me alone. He stood in the street, watching me walk into the house and lock up before walking away back to that abandoned house. Now I'm just left thinking if I'm overreacting or if being totally creeped out is the correct response. I've put in a report and spoken to a couple of neighbors, but none of them have seen him around, which I guess is good. But anyway, if you guys have any advice or if you think that I should be a bit more concerned, then please do let me know, because this is the first time that anything like this has ever happened to me. So something really creepy happened to me yesterday. I'm still processing it because I really don't know what to think about it. But before I get to it, here's a little bit of context. So I live in Ireland, pretty peaceful country. Recently moved from Galway to Dublin. I moved to North Dublin, which is the rougher part, but it's still not too bad. I lived with my family outside the city, could be considered the countryside, I guess. But the area is pretty rural. It's just houses and farms, pretty much, with no shops or stations nearby. Mind you, there are a lot of houses around, but we're all distance as we have big gardens. But there are no sidewalks, and the road is pretty narrow and worn out. And it's rare to see cars, so it's fine to go on the road. Now, I was going on my daily 2K run. Usually I go at around 6 p.m, but yesterday I had some studying to do and I went out at around 9 p.m. It was pretty dark by this point. Now, imagine on the left that there will be a house that's lived in, lights on. Then on the right you'll see a field or a farm. Then you'll see an abandoned building right beside, and then an area of trees for like 200 meters or so. This is pretty much the whole road. Not abandoned by any means, but creepy enough to scare me at night. Anyways, I usually listen to music on my run, with the volume all the way up so that I can't really hear anything. I reach the area with the patch of trees. It's basically pitch black, the lights don't work properly. Occasionally they turn on and sort of flicker back off. I need to use a flashlight to navigate at this point. A song from West Side Story is blasting on my headphones and I'm just sort of vibing. And then the lights flicker back on, so that's good. But that's when it hits me. There's a figure standing around 30 meters away, like 20 meters from the road and the trees. First I thought that maybe I was seeing stuff, but no. He was just standing still, not moving at all. I'm sort of creeped out, so I just keep running. I turn down the volume of the music just in case to hear the figure move, so I can make a run for it if I need to. I speed up, past the figure. I still don't turn up my music. And after around maybe 100 meters away, I turn up the music and try to process what had just happened. Maybe I was seeing things because it was pretty dark. At this point, I'm pretty much long gone. However, I still have to come back home, and usually I walk back the distance that I ran, so basically I run 2Ks and walk back 2Ks. Again, I came to that spot. This time the lights are flickering, but they're almost staying on, I guess. I try to observe the spot where the figure was standing, but I see nothing. At this point, I'm pretty creeped out. I turn off the music and start to run past that spot because I'm a little bit scared. And then suddenly, a man jumps across the street right in front of me. It looks like the same figure. I come to a halt for a second. I'm shocked, and then he starts moving, so I turn around and I start running as fast as I can. While I'm doing this, I start screaming for help, literally screaming as loud as I can while running. I eventually passed the trees and went to the area with the houses. Someone heard me screaming and came out asking me if everything was okay, so I stopped running and realized that the guy, whoever he was, is gone. I explain everything to the man. At this point, I'm extremely creeped out and scared. I still need to get back home, but my parents aren't home. They went over to a friend's house, so I'm left home alone. I asked the stranger for a lift because I'm not going back there ever again. Thankfully, the stranger isn't a big old creep and he kindly escorts me back home. I lock all the doors and check everything to make sure that I'm safe. Shortly after, my parents arrive, but I don't tell them anything because I don't want to worry them. I haven't gone out for a run today because, well, I'm genuinely scared. I'm terrified thinking about what would have happened if I was too tired to run and he caught me. I'll update you guys if anything happens. I don't think anything else will happen though, hopefully, but I'll definitely be keeping my ear to the ground and listening out for any stories too. Because who knows, maybe this isn't the first time. If anyone could provide some advice or information, it would be appreciated. Everyone that I've talked to about my experience doesn't really believe in the paranormal, so they've all just sort of brushed it off. I, a 25-year-old female, live alone in the suburbs of Atlanta. Last night at around 9:30 p.m. I took my dog outside in my backyard. For context, I have a large chain-linked fenced-in backyard that has taller grass or shrubbery close to the fence line. My backyard is both surrounded by other houses as well as a wooded area. At the time of this experience, the surrounding houses did not have their lights on, nor did it seem like any of my neighbors were actually outside. Anyway, at around 9:50 p.m., I think, I was standing close to the tall grass when I heard a quiet, "Hey," come from the fence line. It was dark in that area, so I assumed it was some kind of animal, and since I didn't want to freak myself out, I tried my best to ignore it. 5 seconds later, I heard the voice again. "Hey." This time I could tell, though, that it was a woman's voice. The voice then continued saying, "Hey, come here, come here." It distinctly sounded like a woman trying to get me to come over there, but my gut told me to go inside ASAP. I freaked out and ran inside. My dog, sadly unaware of what was going on, refused to follow me inside. Visibly shaking, I frantically called my boyfriend, who rushed over to investigate the backyard. He, of course, found nothing and assured me that it was probably an animal. I've read a couple of stories about animals sounding like humans, and I tried my best to come up with a logical solution, but I am positive that I heard a human voice calling me. The voice was so clearly human. During my time outside last night, I never heard footsteps or rustling in the woods or anything. To me, it feels like whatever was calling me must have been right outside of my fence line and was calling me over so that I would be close enough to get to. I'm not sure if I experienced a person or some kind of creature, but whatever it was, it felt so evil, and I knew that I was in danger by being outside. I am absolutely terrified to go outside at night again, but I know that I can't avoid it. I have some lights around my backyard, but clearly not enough, so I plan on installing some around the fence perimeter. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Is there anything that I can do to prevent this from happening again? While I was living and studying in the capital of my country, I had a small rented basement of a 1917 built house next to a nightclub. I was preparing to go to sleep quite early since I had class at 8 a.m. the next day. Right before I fell asleep, I remembered that I forgot to lock the door, but since the city I lived in was generally quite safe, and the only way to get to the entrance of my place was past the front gate, all around to the other side of the house and down some stairs, I didn't think much of it and proceeded to fall asleep. Skip forward to the middle of the night. I wake up and feel someone or something slowly pulling my blanket off of me. In a confused state, I extend my hand and feel a hairy male arm under my fingers. My first thought was, oh, this is probably my drunk flatmate, but then I remembered that he was at his girlfriend's place on the other side of town. In pitch black, I jump up from my bed, rush to the light switch, and I turn it on. And I find a stranger, around my age, student, standing in his underwear by my bed, with his underwear clearly wet. My initial reaction was to stay calm, since I had no idea if this dude was violent, or what was even going on in the first place. I calmly asked him, "Man, what are you doing in here?" He was clearly very confused as well, and took a seat on a recliner that I had in my tiny room. And there we were, both in our underwear, him covered in himself after he wet himself, and I on the border of wetting myself, and what does he do? He extends his hand and introduces himself to me. At that point I go, "Okay dude, get out of my house," and start escorting him to the hallway, where I find all of his clothes and shoes on the floor. As I'm escorting him out, he goes into the bathroom and locks himself inside. I hear him turn on the shower and proceed to knock on the door saying, "Hey man, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." To which he replies, "I'm not afraid of the police." Well, that's just perfect, isn't it? A few minutes pass and he steps out of the bathroom butt naked, with my flatmate's towel around his waist, looks at me looking kind of content and says, "Hey, did you see they've got a shower here?" At that point, I am fuming. "This is my house," I say. "You're a total stranger and you just broke into my place." Suddenly, an expression of complete fear appears on his face. "Oh, what have I done?" he says. He says this as he's very awkwardly trying to get dressed in the hallway. Then I finally managed to get him out of the house. I even called one of his friends from my phone to come and pick him up at the club. Turns out he's from a completely other town and came to party to the capital, got kicked out of the club for starting a fight, and somehow managed to get to my place. To this day, I have no idea what he was on or how the heck he even managed to find my apartment, as it was pretty hidden from the street, which I guess is the weird thing about this story. Anyway, going through something like this is terrifying. I know it's probably a little bit amusing for others to hear this story, but let's just say that I never forgot to lock the door from that day on. When I was little, I lived in an apartment and my dad was gone for 2 weeks on a business trip. I was home alone with my mum. I was never really scared easy, as I've always been in love with investigating the paranormal, yet respecting it at the same time. If I go into a room and I don't feel welcome, I just don't stay. It just seems like common sense to me, but I kept having these nightmares, all from what I could tell the same night. I'd be sleeping in bed with my mum. I was pretty young at this point, and I woke up. Shortly after, though, a big clown would always pop in and see me awake. I would wake my mum up, and it would charge at us and slaughter us in the dream. The clown was emotionless with black and small eyes. I don't ever remember seeing a mouth, but I know that it had one. It was white and grey and severely overweight, at least 400 to 500 pounds. It was about the size of the door frame, so almost 6'8", and it never made any sound verbally or physically by walking. It cast a feeling of dread, yet at the same time I got the feeling that it just didn't want to be seen. I got the feeling that it was curious and observant of me and didn't want to be caught or known about. So, like I said, I had this dream and I was terrified to do anything by myself. But there was one more night before my dad was coming home, and I was terrified that I'd be sleeping in my own bed again. We went to bed and eventually I fell asleep. But I woke up right after the same dream for like the 14th time in a row, except this time I had that feeling of dread still. Something in my gut told me that it was happening in real life now. I closed my eyes and pretended to go to sleep. I cracked them as far open as I could while still looking asleep and sort of positioned myself under my blanket perfectly to keep an eye on the door. I waited so long, but in the end nothing happened. finally started to breathe normal, and that was when something happened. The same exact clown from the same exact dream walked into the doorway. I looked at my mum, then looked at me. It sat there silently, I'd assume making sure that we were asleep, then just walked out. I never heard 1 ounce of sound from him, but I could hear the AC. I heard the front door open and close too. After that, I got up and I didn't go back to bed that night. But the weirdest thing was that the next day, my dad asked my mum why the front door was unlocked, and she asked me if I unlocked it. She knew that I'd stayed up that night. In the end, I just said yes because I knew that if I told them the truth that I would sound crazy. So this has been happening for around 3 days now. It only ever happens when I'm in my bedroom or close to it, just outside of my room in the hallway or something. Every few minutes I'll hear a sort of high-pitched scream or crying. It's not loud though, it's sort of on the same level as mumbling, I guess, or maybe whispering, but I can still make it out, what it sounds like. It started about 3 days ago. I was playing on my PS4 with headphones on and I kept hearing weird noises in my room. Sometimes it was a sort of screaming or yelling type noise, and sometimes it was sobbing. The sobbing noise is hard to describe. It's like when someone's crying so hard that they start choking, and they only last for about 2 seconds, or sometimes they're really quick and are only a split second. I thought that it was just background noises in the game at first, and I kept looking around for the source of the noise, but I found nothing. I thought it must have been my headphones making a weird noise because they're a little broken, so I just ignored it at that time. But the next day I was lying in my bed watching YouTube at around 9 p.m. when I started to hear the same noises again. This time I thought that it was my pet bird making the noise for some reason, so I got up to check on her and she was sleeping. I've had birds in the past that sometimes make noises in their sleep, but this one doesn't, so I knew that it wasn't her. So I went back to bed and carried on watching YouTube. A few minutes later, the noises started again. I tried to just ignore it and hope that it would go away, but it didn't. The noises went from happening every few minutes to about every 10 seconds. I actually started to get really scared at this point, and I sat up. But as soon as I did, the noises suddenly stopped. That cycle repeated for the rest of the night too until I went to sleep at around 11. I'd watch YouTube, hear noises, keep still, start moving, the noises suddenly stop, and repeat all over again. The same thing has been happening to me today as well, except the noises are not as frequent. I have no idea what's causing this, and honestly, it's getting more annoying than frightening at this point. Although, it really does sound like someone screaming and crying. I really don't know what to do, and if you've got any ideas as to how to figure this one out, then please do let me know. I feel like I've looked everywhere, and I just cannot understand where this noise is coming from. So this is not my story, but my dad's. He grew up with a single mum and 4 other siblings in southeast Texas, on the border of Louisiana, in the bad part of town. The house that this happened in was behind a nightclub. He was born in 1967, and says that this happened when he was 2, and he still remembers it. He says him and his brother, who was maybe 6 at that time, were sleeping on the couch in their living room, and they both woke up to a black-eyed child standing in the doorway of their closet. He said that the child looked older than them by a little, had black eyes and orange hair, and had a slight sort of glow to him, like he was under his own spotlight almost. He said that him and his brother tried to scream, but nothing would come out. Then the child just suddenly disappeared before their eyes. And the reason that everybody knows that this is true is that a couple of months ago, me and my mum and my dad, we were at my grandma's house and my uncle was watching a documentary on black-eyed children when my dad brought up what happened to them all those years ago. And my uncle started tearing up a bit and just kept repeating, "Man, you seen that too? I thought that I was crazy. I can't believe that you saw him too." My uncle has a history of drug usage and mental health problems, and all of these years, for over 50 years, he assumed that what he had seen was fake, and just his mind playing tricks on him. It's sad too, because we think that this situation shook him up so badly as a kid that it might have been the cause of his use of drugs as a teen to cope with the thought that he may have been going crazy. They were so scared that they just never brought it up ever again after that. But my dad always told my mum that story ever since they started dating. My grandma, who was sitting there listening to them talk about what happened, just said, "Oh, there was something in that house, Lord." And after hearing that, I'm going to try and get her to tell me about her experiences in that same house. So my wife and I moved into her grandma's old house maybe 3 years ago now. My wife always told me that her grandma would tell her the closet and the bathroom in the master bedroom were haunted. Grandma never really shared details. I always thought that these kinds of stories were dumb, so I just didn't ask questions. And the house was normal and still is, I think. But fast forward to last month. We now have 2 children. One is a 2-year-old girl and one is a 3-month-old newborn. My 2-year-old is very ahead in preschool as far as talking in full sentences and anything cognitive. My 2-year-old is very ahead in preschool as far as talking in full sentences and anything cognitive. When we had our newborn, the 2-year-old wanted back in our room because, well, she felt left out. I know, go ahead and judge the parenting. But about 2 months ago, my 2-year-old was at my parents' house for a sleepover. My daughter has a tablet that I let her use on aeroplanes or long travel to watch kids' videos and whatnot. The phone hadn't been used in some time and was in this closet. I have YouTube Premium, which will play videos without the screen being activated. The phone started playing loud "Rain, Rain, Go Away" music. We opened up the phone and YouTube said, "Video unavailable." We have video footage of this, by the way. If someone needs footage, I can probably share it, but a couple of weeks later, I still think my wife is full of it. We go to the park with our 2-year-old. She's swinging, there's no wind. All the swings around her aren't moving an inch from the wind, which they should, since they would actually attract more air resistance. But 2 swings at the end are fully swinging like kids are on them. It was weird. And I also have some footage of that too. Anyway, I work night shifts this month, so I don't get home until 2 in the morning. At 2 weeks, my daughter has been lying in bed with my wife and will go point to the ceiling saying, "Mean cloud, go away, black cloud, go." At the time, my wife just shrugged it off and assured her everything is okay and she would go back to sleep. But the last week, things have gotten worse. My daughter will say the same things, but cover her ears and try hiding in my wife's chest to get away and start screaming as loud as she can. My wife talked to her grandma, who used to live here, and she came over 3 days ago. My wife recorded her privately for audio in her pocket. At this point, we think, what the heck is going on? My wife asked her grandma, without the 2-year-old around, about how the house was haunted, and grandma said, "Oh, honey," and walked to the bedroom and shut the closet and the bathroom door. They returned to the living room and Grandma said, "Sorry, can't let them listen." Grandma started with saying, "Oh, you think you'd scare me?" referencing whatever was going on. Grandma stated that she would tell the black cloud, "Oh, you think you're funny? It was some sort of cloud, so it kept swooping at me." Finally, I just said, "Well, you're wasting your time. I'm not scared of you." To be noted, too, is that Grandma now has dementia and stated that she now thinks this might have been a dream. This is also on video. Personally, I feel ridiculous even sharing this because I don't believe in paranormal activity at all. But tonight, I was working and my wife called me in tears as she woke up to my 2-year-old hunched over yelling "no, no," and tried to grab her to calm her down. My daughter climbed under the bed and started banging her head off the ground and busted her lip, causing it to bleed. I came home as fast as I could and my daughter's mouth was slightly bleeding. She was shaking. Like I said, it's more than likely night terrors and a weird sequence of events now that my wife is more paranoid, i.e. lights being on that we never use, clocks dying more than normal, daily in fact, the swings at the park swinging next to my daughter with no wind, on video like I said. I really don't know what to think about any of this now, and if you have any advice then I would love to hear it. I'm more than likely going to take her to the doctor to make sure that she isn't sick or vitamin deficient or something like that. I want my wife and kid at ease, and I just want this to be over and done with. About 19 years ago, near my hometown in country New South Wales, I used to get driven to catch a bus from a town called Parks, about 1.5 hours from my hometown, to go and visit my then boyfriend in another town several hours away. The bus that I had to travel to get to left from Parks at around 2 in the morning, and it arrived back late at night, and my dad would always pick me up. And on 2 separate occasions, we saw something strange. On the first occasion, we were driving along the country road in between 2 towns. The road ran in between fenced-off farms. There were hills behind these farms that were sort of silhouetted against the often bright night sky, and we saw a big ball of light traveling down the hill parallel to our car, probably a couple of kilometers away, and we thought that it was just a truck at first, possibly driving along there, until we both realized that there wasn't actually a road there, and it was 1 light, not 2. Like car headlights have 2 headlights, right? And it definitely wasn't a motorcycle. Just because there wasn't a road there didn't necessarily mean that it wasn't a vehicle though, but it moved so smoothly and quickly, and we just thought that it was really weird, I guess. We didn't really think too much about it, until a few weeks later when we were doing the same drive late at night, possibly a bit after midnight, and we saw the same light in the same area, moving quickly and smoothly again. This time, Dad decided to stop the car and turn off the engine, and when he did that, the light came down the hill and it was hurtling towards us across the farm fields and over the fence that divided the farms from the road, and man, it was fast. The ball of light was probably about 2 meters off the ground and had a diameter of around 1.5 meters, I would say. It was huge, silent, a ball of light that kind of fluctuated and rotated as it moved. It slowed and covered in the middle of the road behind our car, probably about 50 meters from behind us. Eventually, though, it slowed and hovered in the middle of the road behind our car, probably about 50 meters behind us. I was terrified, but Dad was fascinated, watching it inquisitively. I was panicking and yelling to start the car and drive. I'm not sure what happened after that because Dad turned the engine on and we just started driving. We never saw that light again, but that was the most bizarre thing that I've ever seen. And every now and again I mention it to my dad, just so that I know that I'm not going crazy, and Dad always confirms every detail of it with me. I'm glad we were both there because otherwise I would probably think that I was going mad. I hadn't heard of min-min lights until years later. The things that people have described as min-min lights match exactly what we saw. I'll never forget it, and I'm wondering if anyone else has ever seen something like this in country New South Wales. I've read lots of stories of these sorts of lights in Queensland, but not New South Wales. I used to hang out with my cousin a lot. We were both 10 and male at the time of this encounter, and I'm now 33. It has always stayed with me too, ever since then. We'd mostly spent our youth roaming the streets as young kids, not causing trouble, but kicking footballs around fields, climbing, hanging out with kids our age, the typical stuff before iPads and Netflix became commonplace. One day, we decided to go and explore a part of town that we'd never explored before. It meant going through alleyways and back streets. The trail would actually end approximately 2 to 3 minutes from my house, which was a safe part of the neighborhood. It was a sunny day, albeit not too warm, and my cousin and I had been walking for what seemed like miles. The journey we'd planned was supposed to go on for longer, but we got bored and decided to take our detour home. The detour involved cutting through an alleyway that looked a little bit like the Coronation Street Ginnel, if anyone is familiar with the TV show. To the left of us were terraced houses, and to the right of us, steel fences with sharp points to deter any would-be thieves. We continued up there, and soon enough, one of the kids from our school lived there, and his mum shouted, "What are you boys doing here?" We ran. I don't know why. We just didn't like her son, and her tone was accusatory, I guess. As we ran, we bumped into another kid. "Don't go that way," he said, as his voice trailed off as he ran farther and farther away from us, down the opposite end of the alleyway. We shrugged and continued on. It got darker with the streets and foliage, but we soon emerged from the alleyway, and that's when we saw the lone boy. A boy, aged maybe 10 to 12, stood there. His eyes were empty. He had a vacant look on his face. Well, the half of his face that we could see well enough. Above his mouth was covered with a veil, somewhat like a Halloween mask of some description, except it was June. Halloween was months away. As we got closer, we noticed that the boy had a kitchen knife in his hands. I mean, a fully real stainless steel kitchen knife, both hands on the handle. The sunlight made the blade glisten. We cracked a joke. "Cooking outside?" But he looked at us blankly. No emotion, nothing. We were too freaked out to move now, and that's when we realized that he hadn't moved either, not a muscle. We saw him blink, but physically the knife hadn't been raised up or pointed at us, just held closely to his chest, blade pointing upwards. We figured that we should get away because instinct told us that this was weird and a bit freaky. Going back down the alleyway didn't seem like a safe option. Being stuck in the alley with a strange kid with a knife didn't seem smart either. In front of us was a road on a steep hill. It was our best bet. We walked up to the top of the hill, keeping an eye on this kid. The top of the hill was maybe 2 to 3 minutes from my house in terms of distance, and at last we felt safe. As we looked back down the hill, the lone kid had put the knife by his leg, now holding it in one hand, but remained in the exact same spot, and stared right back up at us, expressionless. When we got home, we told our parents what had happened, and they called a local community enforcement team to scout the area. And apparently the kid was found with the knife, but we never heard why he was there or what he was doing. 23 years after it happened, and it's still on my mind a lot. So my very first experience happened when I was about 3 to 4 years old. I used to live in this cute little house in a very close-knit community or neighborhood up in Massachusetts. It was a modest house with an upstairs, ground floor, and cellar areas. Immediately upon walking through the front door, the living room was to your right, the kitchen to your left, and a staircase was directly to your front. At the top of the stairs, there were 2 rooms to the left and right, which was my room on the right and my parents' room to the left. Now, I don't remember much about my parents' room, but mine felt humongous as a kid. There were a lot of interesting things about my room too, but one of the most interesting things about it was the closet. I was unaware of it, but there was a door at the top of my closet that went up into the attic-themed sort of bedroom above mine. The closet was very small, A typical one with a light bulb and a dangle string to turn it on and off, and a rod to hang clothes. Needless to say, the door was definitely oddly placed. My parents never used it, which is even more odd in retrospect, but anyway. My first experience, as you could probably guess, happened in my bedroom. I kept some of my toys in my closet, and I had pulled them out at one point. It was a blue rectangular Lego bucket filled with miscellaneous toys and doohickeys, and of course Legos. I'd also pulled out some pieces of paper, Play-Doh, and colored pencils at one point. I was going ham with every toy and entertaining item that I had. And well, my dad had been in the habit of drawing cubes at the time, and that had confounded my childhood brain. I kept thinking, how in the world is he putting the pencil into the paper to draw the back part of the cube like that? So just imagine a little booger-nosed child sitting in front of an open closet with all his toys, Legos, and snakes made out of Play-Doh, stabbing a piece of paper with a colored pencil, trying to draw the back of a cube. When all of a sudden I was distracted by a noise in the closet, and upon looking up, noticed the little dangle switch for the light bulb was swaying back and forth. I thought absolutely nothing of it, and continued stabbing my paper. A couple of moments later, another noise came from the closet, but this time the dangle was flailing back and forth like crazy. I thought to myself, adult stuff that I don't understand, whatever, and continued on. I apparently was able to ignore that. Child me just didn't give a hoot, without giving it a second thought, and then the noise changed. I looked up again to see the string completely motionless, and it proceeded to pull down over and over again, turning the light on and off. Then the door literally closed by itself. Never seen that before. Must be adult stuff. Whatever, I thought. This is one of those experiences that I guess gave me extra goosebumps later on, because I only realized it in hindsight that was not supposed to happen. Now, the other experience I had in this room was around the same time frame, except that it was pretty much every night. I'm willing to concede that perhaps this is my childhood mind going wild before bedtime, and it could have been a persistent nightly hallucination, I guess. It's doubtful based on what I remember, but still, it's possible. Now, my bed was in the far corner of my room from the bedroom door, and next to my bedroom door there was a window. I laid in my bed facing this window every night, and it was what I usually focused on as I fell asleep. The interesting thing that would happen, though, was that a pale blue light would be in my window every night. It wasn't this sort of brazenly bright, tangible light or anything, mind you. I didn't just have Casper floating in my window is what I'm getting at. It was more accurately described as a sort of mist, I guess. It was like it was there, but also it sort of wasn't. Almost like when you're in the dark and you look at something long enough that it starts to change, but it obviously isn't changing. Hard to articulate, but regardless, when I looked at the light, it became whatever I would think about it. At the time, I loved Iron Giant movies, so that is what I constantly imagined. It would be the Iron Giant in the distance, but transparent and bluish, walking toward my house, but never getting any closer. I'd watch this until I fell asleep for months, and I don't really recollect when it stopped, but it never seemed scary to me. Weird, right? Anyway, my parents had their own experiences in the house too, so there was definitely something going on. I might go over those as well at some point, but I want to focus on what I saw or heard directly with my own 2 eyes and ears. So fast forward roughly 10 years, and I'm about 13 to 14 years old. I had moved to Virginia in this time, but I had to move back to Massachusetts to visit my grandmother with my family for a holiday. She lived in an apartment complex, and her apartment was very cozy and decently sized. I had visited this place many times as a kid, because my parents needed a break from me and dropped me off to my grandma's. And I had never really experienced anything weird, I guess you could say, even in hindsight. Needless to say then, when they asked me to take the couch in the living room at night, I really thought nothing of it, and I obliged. So there I was, in the pitch black darkness, laying on the couch at 1 or 2 in the morning in my grandmother's apartment. I had my Game Boy with my Pokemon Emerald game inserted, and for those of you familiar with Pokemon, specifically Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, there is a Pokemon named Zigzagoon with the ability Pickup that allows them to be holding random goodies after a battle sometimes. You could get gold nuggets and rare candies in the beginning of the game in Ruby and Sapphire by using this method to farm them, but they had apparently nerfed this method in Emerald and made the loot level-based. So picture me on the couch slowly figuring this out on my own and becoming increasingly annoyed at Pokemon. It sort of randomly dawned on me that I was in the pitch black darkness. I wasn't scared of the dark, but this thought came to me in a way that I can only describe as artificially, I guess. I normally wouldn't have cared, and I was definitely more focused with farming resources in Pokemon. But immediately upon having this realization, I suddenly heard something on the ceiling. It was almost muffled, but it sounded like a man constantly mumbling without a pause. I sort of perked up and looked up at the ceiling like, what is that? Bear in mind, it sounded like it was in the room with me, not a neighbor above or anything. The sound began to get louder and the words became more discernible. They were my thoughts. Freaked out, I casually got under the covers while assuring myself that I wasn't actually scared. I'm just cold and I'm getting comfy, is what I told myself. Now, when I say that they were my thoughts, what I mean is that whatever I thought, this thing or whatever it was would recite it. It was sort of like a mumbled whisper, but if I thought the word dog, it would start saying dog over and over and over again. If I thought any word, it would say it. Under the blankets, I turned the volume on my Pokemon game to max and I press it against my face and fly my character to the battle frontier for the loudest music in the game. But it didn't help. As a matter of fact, the voice descended down slowly from the ceiling while it also became louder. When it got to the point where I definitely couldn't ignore it anymore, I just listened and I grasped how it worked. My teenage mind immediately decided, haha, I can make it say the F word and other expletives. So that's exactly what I did. I made it say the most outrageous stuff that I could think of. And for about 30 seconds, that was hilarious. But then it wasn't. It was right next to my head, and pretty much just as loud as a real man whispering next to me. The thing that really began to scare me was how relentless it was with its whispers, and as I got scared, my thoughts began to reflect that. As I said before, it recited my thoughts, and I was thinking things like, what is that? What is that? It's right next to my head. These were the things that were being repeated back to me. That freaked me out into fight or flight mode, and in the end I chose fight. I immediately flipped my blanket off of my head and launched a haymaker in the direction of the sound. It immediately stopped, and when I looked around, there was nothing there. That was pretty much it for that situation, and it was the last time that I ever experienced anything of that nature. I'm now 27 years old, so I'm starting to become a bit more of a skeptic, I guess you could say, but it's just something that I'll never forget, what I experienced that night, and I have trouble shaking it off as just a hallucination. But I'm curious to hear as to what you guys have to say, and any of your thoughts on these things. Have you had any similar experiences, and what do you think that this all could have been? Let me start off by saying a couple of things. I'm autistic and I have a hard time narrowing down a story to a couple of lines, so this may be a bit longer than it needs to be. Me and my mum are both believers. We've had plenty of experience with the paranormal in the past, and I've been open to the paranormal since a young age. Whether that be shadow people, relatives that have passed on, come to visit us, possessions, you name it, we've probably had some sort of an experience with it. Now, I work as a delivery person. I deliver papers and ads in my city. I use a metal wagon cart to put the papers and stuff in so that I can take more with me on one trip. I pull this behind me. It's important to the story, I promise. I like to do this work in the evening though, because I like how quiet it is and the fact that not many people are outside, so I can do my work in peace and avoid talking to people. And this all happened in the span of 30 minutes. So the first thing that happened was a cold hand touched me on my right shoulder. It felt like a right hand. The hand was not icy cold, but really as cold as a corpse, if that makes sense. It didn't put a lot of pressure on me or anything. It was more as to, get my attention or whatever. Say you're walking behind someone and you want their attention. I was pulling my cart behind me, so this simply wouldn't be possible for someone to touch my right shoulder with their right hand like that. I looked around in confusion, thinking to myself, okay, that's weird. I did not see anyone or anything around me. The nearest people near me were across the parking lot. The second paranormal thing happened maybe 2 minutes after on in the same street as the first encounter, just a little further away. I think that they may be related, but I'm not sure. There's a restaurant at the corner of the street in my town with automatic doors that you have to come closer to so that they open. You have to be within 1 to 2 meters for the door to register a person. I was walking 5 meters away from the door and the door opened. I looked inside and didn't see anyone in the hallway. All I saw was the person at the register cleaning the counter. I walked past, not really thinking anything of it. I left my cart at the corner of the street and crossed the street to deliver a few papers. I came back, grabbed another one for said restaurant, and went to put it in the mailbox. I turned to go and walk towards the mailbox, and I see the door opening again from quite far away. This time I was a good 7 meters away from the sensor, and behind a pillar that's in front of the restaurant, so there's no way I could have triggered it. I walked around the pillar and felt something shoving or kicking my butt. It wasn't hard and it didn't hurt, but it was enough to make me stumble and force me to take another step. I looked around me and again, there was no one there. I thought maybe it was those people that I saw in the parking lot earlier, but they were quite far away by then. I wasn't scared as much as I was unnerved, I guess, that two things happened so close together like that. I called my mum right as that happened though, and I told her what was going on. While on the phone with her, I continued to walk my route and everything was fine. I moved into the next section without anything else happening and I hung up. Now, the third thing happened in the next section of my route, and it completely freaked me out. One of the streets I have to deliver on is a cul-de-sac type of street. It goes down a hill for a little bit, then it wraps around some other houses and comes out on the other side of them. There is a lamppost shining its light onto the street where the cul-de-sac begins. I enter the first part of the street that goes down and I put my cart down so that I could deliver some more houses. I was halfway down the street when I saw the train of a dress fly by around the corner where I just came from, by the beginning of the cul-de-sac. I don't mean flying as the person was hovering off the ground. I mean flying in the sense of the person was running past, and the train was following behind them. Think of a typical sort of scary movie where a ghost runs around the corner and you just catch a glimpse of them. It wasn't an actual person though, because the light didn't get obstructed by them. I just saw that dress. In any case, I quickly finished the street, grabbed my cart and stood under a lamppost where I felt safe and I called my mum. She told me that she was on her way already since our last call, and she said that I sounded really scared and freaked out, and hearing me now I was almost hyperventilating. I told her that it wasn't necessary and I'd stay in the streetlights, and the parts that weren't lit well, I would do them tomorrow during the day. She then came to me anyways and came with me as I finished the rest of my route. I was mostly done anyway, so it wasn't too long. But when we came home, we looked some things up about it, and we tried a few things to protect me from whatever this was, and I'm wearing my crystal bracelets again, and will not be taking them off for a week. I personally think that the first two incidences are related. Maybe the cold hand was trying to warn me for the push or kick that I would receive a little later, or it was trying to get my attention with the hand, and when I didn't respond, it gave me a shove to get my attention. For the third thing, though, I just don't know. It really freaked me out. I am freaked out and still quite anxious about the whole thing too. For now, I will not be doing my work during the evening, and I'll be doing it during the day. I do have a question, though, for all of you. Do you think that this is all related? Or were these just a few paranormal occurrences that just sort of happened in a span of 30 minutes and are unrelated? So, I had this old townhouse that I lived in for a couple of years in Florida on Tinder Air Force Base. Apparently, there were old burial mounds discovered there. A true story as well, you can Google it. While wife and I, lived there, we experienced some stuff that we never really got answers for. These stories are completely true though. One night, we were sitting in the living room, which is connected to the kitchen, where our side entrance door was, roughly 10 p.m. or so I would say, when all of a sudden, we hear our kitchen door slam shut, hard enough to shake the windows. After a few minutes of us both just sitting there, sort of collecting ourselves, we go and check the door. Now, not only was there no damage, the door was locked and deadbolted shut. There was no way someone could have opened it without breaking in. They certainly couldn't pick the lock or something and then lock it again after they panicked and slammed the door. This was over a decade ago now, and we still occasionally bring it up in disbelief that it actually happened. The second one I didn't experience myself, but I was home when it happened. So I was again sitting in our living room, playing some video games. Wife was in the bathroom down the hall. Our bedroom was directly across from the bathroom. Wife comes out to where I was with a really terrified look on her face. She said that she apparently saw me walk by the bathroom where she tried to get my attention, but I ignored her and walked into the bedroom. She followed me in there, but when she got there, there was nobody. And obviously I was still out playing games. She was understandably incredibly freaked out by this, but I swore to her that I'd never moved from the couch. Now, this last story probably freaked me out the most, and makes me think that maybe it was a poltergeist or something. You see, we're laying in bed about to go to sleep. It's pitch black in our room, can't see anything. When all of a sudden we start hearing scratching coming from the closet by the foot of the bed. We both get quiet and listen. The sound starts getting closer, scratching on the walls now. Now it's softly rattling the blinds on the window next to my side of the bed. At this point, we're in full-blown nope mode and try to ignore it. I bury my face in the pillow and I try to go to sleep. A few minutes go by and then something lands on the back of my neck. I freak the heck out and I do a smash, grab, and throw of whatever is on my neck, and then run to the light switch. It was a cockroach, but it was literally the size of my palm. It could be a massive coincidence that it landed on essentially the only exposed piece of skin that I had between the covers and the pillow, but a part of me thinks that it might have been used to scare me, considering the other stuff that we had dealt with. Plus, the absolute size of this thing was crazy. There were some other times as well that maybe I'll talk about some other time, but I'll leave it there for now. Feel free to ask any questions, but I genuinely don't know more beyond what I've already written. So my first job out of high school was a retirement home. My job was in the kitchen. It was my job to do a lot of the grunt work, I guess you could say. This is why I was hired. Haul the trash, food carts to the floors for the residents, bust the tables, etc. The old facility had 4 buildings and was built more than a century ago. The primary residence, the 2 dormitories, and a maintenance building for the workers. This facility, if memory serves me correct, was originally created to house tuberculosis patients. The maintenance building and the primary residence were the only ones with power. The dormitories had been shut down over the past decade or two. Tuberculosis was cured. Now, this next part I'm unsure of, but as the maintenance personnel are my source, I really had no reason not to believe them, as it was logical, and what they said is that in time the dormitories were gutted. There was no electricity supplied to the buildings, not even a light bulb. Months would go by and not see anything or even think that I may have, but when I did, it would be something out of the corner of my eye that made you sort of do a double take. Hauling the garbage out at night, I could see a dark figure moving across window panes here and there, and on another night somewhere else. Since it didn't repeat immediately, I just sort of dismissed it, I guess. Sometimes you think you see a resident on the grounds, only to do another take realizing that they aren't there. After being there for nearly a year, a weird thing started happening though. The elevator next to the kitchen, a service elevator used by the employees, started moving on its own. It was a cranky, slow and loud beast. Not obsolete, but definitely the original one when it was built. It was my job to take the dining carts to the floors from the kitchen for the residents that had food brought to them. At first, it sort of started randomly too. I'd pull the cart up the elevator and the door would just open. Okay. It's really not supposed to do that unless you hit the button. In time, it would do more as well. Not all the time, it was sort of completely random really. I would still hit the floor I would be going to, not thinking paranormal. Someone must have just pressed the elevator button, calling it to their floor. It was one of these trips that my dull-witted mind noticed something though. If someone called the elevator, and I went to the second floor with no interruption, and no one got into the elevator from the second floor, why didn't it go to the third or fourth floor before allowing me to return to the base floor, or one floor below floor 1? It took some weeks before I got the opportunity to try what I was thinking, and it happened. One night, taking a cart to the third floor, the elevator opened as I approached it. I pulled the cart in and decided not to hit a button. The doors closed and off the elevator went. Did someone summon the elevator? Lo and behold, the elevator got to the third floor. No one was there. I pushed the dining cart out, returning to the elevator. The elevator started moving again and returned me to the base floor. Did that just really happen? No, that's impossible. In time, I got my chance to replicate this. Not long after that time, I just explained. It happened exactly how the other one did, except this time the second floor. Exactly the place that I needed to be and returned me to the base floor. Over the next 5 months, it happened so often that I actually came to expect my lift man was going to ferry me up and down. I did thank him from time to time, whether I was making a delivery or returning to collect the dining cart. It just happened. Did he do it all the time? Well, no, but enough to expect it. And well, I messed up. I brought it up to a coworker that the elevator was doing this. This apparently wasn't a good thing to do, divulging this was happening, because the lift man stopped lifting for me after this. I guess he didn't like his little secret being outed. It never happened again, like ever after this. One of the joyless jobs was taking the trash out, like I said earlier. A big bin across ice on an uneven sidewalk, covered in more ice through the courtyard, all by yourself, is not a good time. It was right in the corner of my eye, though, a light come on in the dormitory, and I looked. And there was a shadow man hanging by the neck from the ceiling in one of the dorm rooms on the 3rd floor. I saw him sway a little to the left and then to the right, and then suddenly the light went out again. I wasn't terribly frightened, I guess, but definitely had the heebie-jeebies crawl up my spine. I was in the what the heck did I just see category, but let's just say the emptying of the trash and getting back inside was definitely top priority after that. It was the first time that I saw a light come on, but it definitely wasn't the last. That room lit up on 3 separate occasions, in fact. The second time, there was nothing. The third was a shadow looking at the window, the kind of looking where the height from the bottom of the window still suggested that they were seated. I wasn't the only one to see the hanging man, too. A co-worker came in one evening, freaking out with tears, saying that they saw someone hanging in one of the rooms. I decided to keep my mouth shut. Over my time there, shadows in that dormitory, this was the dorm with the morgue that I learned later, or was told later, would be seen more directly than the corner of your eye. I personally never saw anything in the dorm, but one of the maintenance men refused to go in there at all. They do sweeps to check the buildings for squatters, and I overheard him talking to a co-worker that he was never going in there again. I got off the elevator on the 3rd floor with a dining cart once. I recall seeing an old and frail woman. She was easily in her 80s, sitting in a wheelchair in a hospital gown that had a sort of tiny floral print. As I turned left to push the cart about 8 feet, I heard her speak. "Excuse me, can you help me?" she said. I stopped the cart and looked at her. Yes, ma'am, what's up?" I said. "I need to get to my room. Can you get me in there?" she replied. Sure," I said. I walked to the back of the wheelchair and asked her where her room was and started pushing it forward. I recall the weight that I was pushing felt heavy on me for such a frail woman. I have the body memory of feeling the weight of the chair work against me, but I got through. I was just surprised, I guess. I was taking baby steps and was slow. I didn't want to jolt this woman in her chair. We went maybe 4 feet before she piped in, "Here it is." I was confused and thought to myself, okay. It was a room in our left, across from the elevator. The light was out in the room and the door was maybe 30% open. "Do you want me to push you inside?" I asked. "Oh, no, this is fine, thank you." With that, I took 4 steps to go. I pressed the elevator button, turning around immediately after to look at her, and when I did, the chair was empty. I, a 22-year-old female, was 18 years old at that time. In those days, I was a party girl, going out 3 times a week and drinking a lot too. That time was really wild for me, and at some point I decided to host a party. It was my first party and I rented a space in my village. It was a cabin on location for events, very cheap for locals. I organized everything with my 18-year-old female best friend. Her name was Mary, and another friend named Rose, same age. We were having fun decorating and preparing the party and whatnot. I remember that I was really stressed about the party being lame at the time. I decided to cope the stress with alcohol at some point, and when the party started and people arrived, I was already pretty tipsy. I had invited unrelated people that I knew from middle school to high school and some friends that I made in college. Even though no one knew anyone, the party was great and people were meeting each other. I had a boyfriend, 19, who was coming with his friends. We must have been around 30 people in total, but it was late summer, so the weather was mild and most people were outside talking, laughing, and dancing. Now, I had this middle school friend, her name was Luna, who binged drink and threw up at the entrance of the cabin. She even hurt her foot, and so she had some difficulties walking. I was at that point pretty drunk, but I wanted to help my friend. I asked her if she wanted to be put to bed, and she said yes, so I took her arm and guided her to my house. I live in a small village in the countryside, so it takes less than 5 minutes to get to my house. It was a pretty safe place, and I used to wander alone in the streets late at night at like 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. when I had insomnia and nothing ever happened. But anyway, it was pitch dark that night. We were the only ones outside, and as we walked, we saw a white SUV, but I didn't think much of it. I came home, gave her some water, and let her sleep in my room. I was alone with my sister that night. I warned her of the presence of my friend and headed back to the party. I wasn't walking straight since I was so intoxicated, but I saw the white SUV parked near the farm. As I continued walking, a black car stopped next to me and opened its window. I looked at the man. I still don't know what age he was. It was too dark to see. But he said to me, "I've seen this white SUV following you for a while. It's dangerous. You should come into my car." I was drunk, but I directly felt that something was wrong instantly. I just answered that I was okay and my friends were nearby. He insisted though, and he repeated to come to his car for my safety. My inner alarm went off at this as I was trying to walk faster and answered again that I was okay, when suddenly I heard the car doors open and I realized that he wasn't alone. I didn't think twice and I just ran for my life as I heard two men running from behind me. I arrived quickly to the cabin. My friends were all drunk. One of my drunk male friends was complimenting Rose. They saw me coming at them in a hurry. The male friend looked at me and started to compliment me, and I told him someone just tried to abduct me. He stared at me and told me that I shouldn't have left alone, that it wasn't safe. The party lasted until 4 a.m. People who didn't drink took their car and left, and the few others were inside the cabin, started to talk, and one of my boyfriend's friends was mad on Snapchat group because he forgot his knife at the cabin or something. Why did he carry a knife with him at the party? I told them about what happened, and we were all definitely spooked. After that event, I stopped wandering in the village late at night, but I hosted a few other parties. I never did see that man again, his black car or the SUV either. And while most people keep telling me how great the party was, a couple who met at the party are still together, in fact, I still wonder to this day what would have happened to me if I didn't react that spontaneously, or even if I had drunk just a little bit more. This happened a few weeks ago, but it scared me a lot, and I learned something new about my home. I was off work and inside for the day. There were several knocks and the person kept ringing the doorbell, so eventually I answered, although I wasn't expecting anyone, and I also live out in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, with one neighbor nearby. A mid-30s man, seemingly having Down syndrome, had parked at the very edge of the driveway on the road, which alarmed me. He asked me questions about knowing anyone who used to live here, and I kept it short and said no. He asked if I was in high school and how old am I, and if I was home alone. My fiancée has 2 cars, so thankfully it looked like I was not alone, and told him no again. But at that, he seemed sort of scared off and ran to his car and sped off. Afterwards, I went over to my neighbors and inquired about the previous owners and the man. They told me that there was an elderly couple with a son with a disability, and the couple had apparently hung themselves in the house. That obviously had my mind blown a bit, and at this point, I'm honestly too scared to even answer my front door again. I mean, what was that guy's deal? And why did he run away seemingly scared when he found out that my husband was apparently home? This happened when I was 7. I was living in upstate New York with my 2 slightly older brothers. We would often hang out down the street at our friend's house. Our friend was named Ben and was around our age as well. One late afternoon, my brother and I went to Ben's for pizza and a movie. We spent most of the day there, so by the time that we were done, it was pretty late. It's pretty dark out now, and we decided to head home. And when we left, we saw a woman standing across the street from Ben's house. We were a little bit weirded out, but she seemed to be minding her own business for the most part. At this point, we were still in the driveway, about to leave, and then this lady looks right at us and sprints in our direction. Ben's mum always had her car parked in the driveway, so we sort of booked it back around the car to try and hide or get away. But she continued to try and follow us around the vehicle, and she kept trying to switch which direction that she was running around the car in an attempt to get to us. The whole time, she was laughing maniacally, a bit like a witch in fact, saying how she wanted to catch us. We were freaked out, of course. She only stopped when Ben's mum came out and asked what she was doing. After hearing the commotion of the cackling witch lady chasing us, the laughing lady sprinted off and was never seen again. Ben's mum, she walked us home that night, and we never forgot it. When I was 11 years old, I went camping with my dad and my stepmom in a small town in West Virginia called Barnum. The park that we went camping in was called the Barnum Whitewater area. At this place, there wasn't really a place to shower, and the bathrooms were just a hole in the ground, and there aren't words to describe how vile they were as well. Our cabin was nice though and cozy, and was maybe 20 feet away from the river. One night, we decided to leave the campground to grab some food because we had almost no food at this point. So we went to get some food. It was really good too, but we went back to the campground at around 9:30 or 10 and decided to drive around for a bit. Well, about maybe a quarter of the way around, there's a girl randomly standing on the side of the road with what looked like a torch. We pulled up to ask her if she was okay, and she sort of just froze. We thought that maybe she was drunk, and in the end we drove off. As we come back around, about 7 or 8 dune buggies come around the corner, and you're not allowed to have those in that campground, but we were like, whatever, and went to the cabin. When we got there though, we saw that the screen to the window was pried open like someone tried to break into our cabin. We were debating on leaving and going back to where we live, New Jersey, when a guy comes up to us with that same girl that we saw in the woods. He asked if we knew her because she was scaring him and his 2 kids. He said that she tried to tear open the tent at one point. We said no, and he walked off and the girl followed. We decided to get the heck out of there at this point, and while we were packing inside, she comes up the driveway, sits down on the porch. We tell her to get the heck off the porch, and she starts crying and then runs away. The final time that we saw her, she came up the driveway and started calling my stepmom her mum and my dad her dad, and we didn't have a clue who the heck this girl was. I can't really remember much about her, but I know that she was blonde and she was pretty tall. Finally we left, but now we called the police, but they said that they couldn't help us for 2 reasons. 1, we had already left, and 2, the cops are not active after midnight apparently. What if someone's being attacked or threatened with a gun though, and is about to die or something? Obviously that shocked us a bit, but we went back and we drove the 4 hours back to New Jersey where we live, and didn't get home until 4 a.m. But to be honest, I'm glad we didn't stay. So, I live in a city, but a few hours away is a job that I worked at for a year ago last year. It's one of those sort of tourist nature tour guiding jobs. The employee housing is in the middle of nowhere in the Appalachians. I went back to work for my spring break. Side note too, since I mentioned the Appalachians, this isn't a ghost story, just a reference for the isolated location, I guess. What I experienced was an actual person. So me and my 2 friends, we decided that we should go to a dive bar 25 minutes away. We're going down this sort of long, dark, unlit road, and it's a highway, and a busier one than you'd think for a town with probably a population of a few thousand, if that. The highway is 1 lane though, in one direction, and 1 lane in the other. We're heading down the street, and I'm not sure what ticked us off, but I think a few cars sort of shine their brights at us, and we slowed down a bit, weary, as we were coming up on a curve that goes right. And well, this guy is in the other lane, walking, in the middle, dancing around. It's pitch black, as I said, not an illuminated highway, so we didn't even see him till our lights hit him. he's in the middle lane next to us and walking along a curve, so in the opposite direction. People aren't going to see him, that is, until they come around the bend, and he's along the bend, so it was really dangerous. My guy friend is driving, and my girlfriend and I are like, this guy's going to get hit. In fact, I had never been more certain of anything in my life, and all we could do was flash our lights at the incoming cars and continue around the bend and find a place to pull over. I've never felt the feel of inside of me before, but we rolled down our windows and braced ourselves for the sound of a crash, the sound of something. I've never had such a sunken feeling in my heart. I felt completely helpless, in fact. But there was no noise. Nothing. We all looked at each other like, what? Do we turn around, continue to the bar, call 911? In the end, we decided to turn around. We all needed to know if this man was still on the road. As we turned around the bend, he was walking on its leads to a long straightaway. There he was in the middle of the road, cars slamming on brakes and moving around him, cars flashing lights, and of course, we end up in a position where we can't go around him because a car is coming. The car passed, and now it's just us and him having a stare down. The car isn't moving, and it's very clear that this man was homeless and on drugs or something, as he went from prancing and dancing on the highway to just complexly still and jittering, sort of staring at us. And you know when you know that somebody's on drugs? Well, I've never seen someone on drugs like this. Whatever he was on, it was scary. I yell at my friend, let's drive, he could have a gun, let's just go, and he was like, yeah, you're right, as he slams on the accelerator, and we speed off just in time as he got close enough to swipe at the car door handles. I missed that as I was in a sheer panic dialing 911, but my friends were like, thank goodness that you said something, because if you hadn't, he would have gotten in. I ended up calling 911 immediately because that dude was massively threatening his life as well as others, but in the end, I'm really not sure what came of it. We ended up turning around again and continuing to the route to the drive bar, but on the drive back from the drive bar, there wasn't any commotion, so I guess that he probably got picked up. This all happened in the span of like 6 minutes, and I swear it was so quick and simultaneous this whole interaction happened, and so it just goes to show that you just never know when life can hit you like this. Things can honestly change in a split second. I've thought about it, and I think that it's time to tell my story. This is a story that happened to me personally, and I'm not here to prove to skeptics anything. I'm just here to tell it. You can take it or leave it for what it's worth. But those who have experienced anything similar to this will know that it's possible. Before this encounter, I didn't have any experience with the jinn, and I had no idea what they were capable of. But I'm going to tell my story now. It's going to be a bit long, so get comfortable, I guess. It all started when I was 13 to 14. I'm 21 now. I used to watch ghost shows for fun as entertainment, but I never believed what I saw could happen to me. I believed it was possible, but I had my doubts, like anyone, I guess. One night, I did something dumb, though. I was really curious about the existence of jinns. I set up a prayer one night, and after I finished my prayer, I called out to God, if jinns are real, then let me have an experience of my own. To be honest, I really don't know why on earth I asked for what I know was a dumb thing to ask for. I guess I was just curious, and this is where it all started. Once I said this, I genuinely think that God answered my prayer and something came through. One night after I made that prayer, I was getting ready to sleep. I wasn't in bed yet, just sort of sorting out a couple of things in my bedroom. I heard a woman say to me to go to sleep, sweetheart, in a really soft and soothing voice. but in an accent that I'd never heard before. This was clear as day too, as if she was right behind me. Obviously, I spun around, but when I did, there was nobody there. In that moment, I hadn't experienced anything like that before, so I just thought of it as I was just tired. I fell asleep and I woke up the next morning getting ready for school. I was happy, I was putting on my clothes when something came up to my ear, my left ear, and started speaking in this really deep and guttural voice that no human man or woman could ever make. It was speaking in a language that I'd never heard of in my entire life, and in that moment, I didn't understand what was happening. I just sort of froze in fear, terrified. All I knew was that as soon as it was done, I too went frantic to my mother, and everyone was asking me what was wrong. After that incident, I also started to feel something watching me. I felt it more when I was alone. It was uncomfortable, to say the least, to be in a room alone. I just always had this really creepy and scary feeling at certain times in the night. It was almost like it was the perfect opportunity for this thing to attack me. Now one night, it was one of those uncomfortable nights, so I lay in my bed listening to my holy text with earphones in when this thing came up to my ear again, blocked the sound of what I was playing in my ear, almost as if it completely muffled out my earphones. Then it began to speak in this deep, low, guttural voice in a language that, yet again, I didn't understand. It freaked me out so much, I began shaking and I was genuinely fearful. One thing about me too is that I stayed on my prayers and I read and listened to everything constantly, but if I ever missed my prayer, this thing would come for me, it seemed, when I missed it. It was almost like an opportunity for it to come after me. It almost seemed as if it hated prayer, but one time when I stood to pray on my own, I said my prayer loudly and this thing then screamed no in a really high-pitched voice. This thing would also constantly growl during the night at the bottom of the stairs, almost like an animal. That was absolutely terrifying too, let me tell you. Now, I'm about to tell you the last 3 experiences that I had with this. Everything up until this point was just little things, I guess. But one night, I went to my cousin's house, and the house was mainly full of female family members. The only male was a boy who wasn't older than the age of 7, I think. One night I woke up and everybody else is fast asleep. I could hear snoring, so I got up and went to the toilet. I did my business and came out. When I came out, I heard something laugh at me with this unnaturally deep voice and even said my name, "I can see you," almost like it was singing. You sort of know in like horror movies when kids sing in a sort of creepy way. It was like that, but imagine a really deep, dark, demonic voice doing it. I quickly went back to my room, terrified, thinking about what had just happened. The only thing that comforted me was that I wasn't sleeping alone in that room that night. Shortly after this experience, I went down to the kitchen late at night to get some water one night, and I had that same feeling again that something was watching me, but I ignored it. It was common at this point, so I usually just brushed it off. But just before I got to the stairs, I looked at the corridor leading to the living room. The light in the kitchen was still on, which gave some illumination. Bear in mind too that the living room door was wide open, so I could see into it. When I looked in, I saw a tall, dark figure, darker than the room, walking through the living room. It reached the ceiling, and it was super tall, whatever it was. It also had what seemed to be like a dark top hat on. I know that sounds weird, but that's what I saw. I couldn't see any features on its face, but it had what looked like a dark, long jacket that reached above its feet. It was through the living room, but the direction that it was walking towards was just a walls anyways. I didn't find out where it went because I just went up the stairs to my room in a panic. One of the final experiences that I had was I was asleep one night and I woke up to a hand touching my feet. I felt fingers wrap around my ankles, like I actually felt each individual finger slowly wrapping around my ankle. Everyone else was asleep, and when I looked, nobody was there, but I felt it. Eventually, it all stopped the same way that it started. I asked God to remove this thing. But this was a couple of months to a year that this was all going on, and honestly, it's something that I'll never forget. And I'm super glad that whatever it was, it never seemed to come back. Right after dinner, my parents were laying on the couch as usual, scrolling through their phones, while me and my youngest brother were watching TV. I urged him to make some fruit salad, which he agreed to, and we both moved to the kitchen. He cut the fruit, bananas at the exact point, and do all the hard work while I was looking for the strawberries in the fridge. From where I was standing, fridge wide open and box of strawberries in hand, I saw someone exit from the front door and even heard the distinct noise that my old door makes. At first, I thought that it was my other brother going outside to retrieve his clothes that were hanging on a rack on the porch. But since the door closed and you can't access it from the outside without keys, I stepped into the living room, strawberry still in hand, with the intent of letting him back in. I casually asked my parents on the couch if my brother got locked outside, and they both said no. At this point, I finally settled down with the strawberries and told them that I saw someone wearing dark clothes exit through the door. There was no knocking, which meant that it was in fact not my brother as well. My mother claimed that she heard a noise too and thought that it was me and my brother in the kitchen, while my father said that he also saw a dark figure swiftly getting out. Both my brothers said that they only heard the sound of the door. Our dog in our garden started barking too, but since my father didn't really feel like getting up and checking, it took a few minutes for him to get up, and anyone that could have been there would have been gone already. We started brainstorming all the options. It could have been the wind, but that meant that the door was ajar to begin with, and that's unlikely because my indoor cat would have sat there sniffing the door the whole time and we would have noticed. Also, our door is very old and it takes a lot of force to close it. Now, I don't really trust my dad since he was distracted leaving me as pretty much the only witness. And I don't really trust myself given that I'm a pretty paranoid person. But was I just hallucinating? I don't know. Also, if you have any tips on calming my paranoia, then that would be much appreciated. Thanks. This happened back in 2013 when I was only 12 years old. I was home alone when this happened. I was sitting on my computer, and we had one of these old phones that had a cord attached to it at the time. Now, I grew up watching horror movies with my older brothers, and I hated being home alone at the time, so whenever I was home alone, I would open every door in the house to get the sunlight in and feel less scared that way. I had been sitting on the computer playing League of Legends when I suddenly get a phone call from my mum. I thought that it was a bit weird because she never calls me this early, so I decided to answer it. And what happened next is something that I'll never be able to understand. I answered the phone call and heard my mum whispering my name in a very low voice. I freaked out for a few seconds. I could feel my heart pounding. I started saying "Mum," but there was no reply. So after a few seconds, I just ended the call and I sat down crying while playing until my mum got home from work. She could see right away that I was anxious and asked me if something had happened. I told her, "Why would you prank me by calling me and whispering my name like that?" And then she said, "I never called you." We even decided to check her phone, and there was never an outgoing call to our house's phone. To this day, she swears that she never called me, but she remembers me being freaked out. My only theory is that it's either something supernatural or it was potentially one of my brothers pranking me, even though they all told me that they didn't. And none of us knew how to spoof a phone call back then, so to be honest, I'm not so sure. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life living in rural Idaho as a farmer and rancher. He had tons of old cowboy stories that he would tell us as grandkids. Most of them were funny, some were cautionary, but a few were, well, just downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and a gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At that time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, mostly a ghost town these days. But back then, it was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. They had hitched sleighs to their horses and headed down to the river to ice skate. There were 8 kids altogether, and they were excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were the 3 Robinson kids, Tommy Bayer and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was next door to the Gooch's ranch. The river there was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to be thicker, and if they did fall through, they would just get their legs wet. Now, the kids spent a couple of hours skating when a loud scream came from a willow bush on the riverbank opposite them. The kids could only watch as, what they said, a giant man covered head to toe in thick black fur came lumbering out of the bushes. It was carrying a large tree branch and was screaming in a rage at the kids. They obviously fled towards the sleighs, trying to scramble up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest, was at the back of the rush. He couldn't get a good foothold because of the skates and also fell backwards towards the ice. The giant was now crossing the river towards them, screaming and swinging his branch. My grandpa was sure that this creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa tells it, Lady Luck smiled down on him that day by the river, because as the giant was midway across the river, the ice finally gave way. It only submerged its shins, but it was slowed down considerably as it tried to get back up on top of the ice. This gave my grandpa's brother just enough time to jump down and cut the laces off of my grandpa's skates. They left the skates and dashed up the riverbank, jumped onto the sleigh, and as they looked back, the giant man was cresting the riverbank. To their relief, it didn't chase the sleighs. It just stood there, hollering at the kids and swinging his tree branch. The kids were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told their encounter to John, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly in the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. Where the kids had been skating, there was found footprints almost 2 feet in length. My grandpa's skates, they were found near the tracks, and to many people's surprise, they had both been bent in half like horseshoes. The tracks, they headed west into the nearby mountains. The posse followed them as far as they could, but deep snow prevented their travel any further. The creature, it was never sighted in that area again, but this story captivated the small community, and soon word traveled across the country of the Idaho wild man. That spring, my great-grandpa decided to buy a ranch in the Little Lost River Valley farther north in Idaho. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said that this encounter frightened him the most. He was sure that he would have been killed if the giant hadn't have broken through the ice and given his brother a chance to cut his laces. The story is a little bit old, but I think it's still worth telling. I think I was about maybe 10 or 11 years old when this happened. And at that age, I used to go to church with my sister and come back at like 8 or 9 p.m. The church was close to my house. It was on the street facing the street where I lived, and I could see it from my front door, in fact. Me, my older sister, and 3 of our friends, who were also like sisters, went back together. They lived in front of a football field, and next to this field there was a sort of small path whose entrance was a big tree. The girls' house was right at the end of that path, but they could also get there by crossing the field. When we arrived in front of the path, we stopped to talk a little bit. The street was lit and some neighbors and a guys in a bar were a little close to where we were, but it was no problem. But suddenly, the youngest of the sisters says that she saw something move in the bush under the tree, and her older sister throws a pebble to see what it was. The moving thing appeared, and it was just the most bizarre thing that I had ever seen. I'd say it was literally the standard description of an alien, with the exception that the skin was a sort of pale yellowish white, big black eyes, a big head, the mouth and the nose were practically stripped, and he seemed to be breathing heavily or maybe panicking or something. It's also worth noting that he was crouched in a way that we only saw his face among the bushes. We were obviously terrified and screamed. The creature also looked scared and looked like it wanted to get out of there. He looked around scared and seemed restless. When we tried to approach him, he just jumped out of the bush and moved like absolute lightning. We could barely see his body, in fact. He was skinny though, and also had a white head. I swear that it was so fast that we lost him instantly. The girls didn't want to go through the path anymore and cross the field, which was understandable given everything that just took place. My sister and I, though, we went back to our house. It was on the same street as the one in the field, really close. And we were even stopped by neighbors asking what had happened, but we didn't answer. When we got back home, we told our mother, who was the only one awake, and to our surprise, she actually believed us, and even went there to see if the thing was still there. Obviously it wasn't. Now, I don't really mind if anyone doesn't believe this, but to this day, I know what I saw and I swear by it. I was 10 years old and visiting my grandparents in Spain as they owned a villa there. In the evenings, we would go out to the same complex type place that had places to eat, bars, and activities for kids. One evening, my family were finishing up their meal when me and my 2 siblings wanted to go off to play. It wasn't far, and as parents do, we were told to stick together. So we're having a great time with the other kids playing, and I decided to walk back to my family for a drink and left my 2 siblings there. But as I'm walking back, the power goes out. The complex is outside, and this was late in the evening, so it was dark already, and all the music had stopped. Everyone continued what they were doing. Maybe the noise level raised slightly because of all the power had gone out, but nothing was lit apart from the slight dim glow of the streetlights across the road. Anyway, I'm walking through like a connection alleyway from one side of the complex to the other, so no one is around this part of the complex, when I notice a man walking behind me and start to get a sinking feeling in my chest. I didn't turn around and I just continued to walk, but I could feel him getting closer to me. He just keeps repeating hello and wait with an accent. I pick up pace, and thankfully the lights turn back on as I'm briskly walking, nearly running at this point, and I reach the more populated area of the complex. I feel safer now, and I turn around as I'm walking and see the man make eye contact with me and then puts a phone to his ear. Luckily, I make it over to my family. I look at the man again, thinking that I'm just being irrational and he probably had good intentions. But the man dips out behind one of the restaurants and looks really shady all of a sudden. To this day, I still wonder whether it was an opportunistic thing that the lights went out, or whether it was part of an organized crime. This happened about 1 year ago during the summer. Something that you should keep in mind too is that the house that I lived in had 1 acre of land surrounding the house. Where I had lived was near farmland. So, I had woken up around 8 in the morning on my living room couch, having fallen asleep the previous night, as well as my mother and sister who were sleeping beside me. I had planned to watch this movie that I had finished the previous night on my laptop, as well as eat breakfast in the dining room of my house. I had sat down at the end of the dining table, which was the closest chair to the kitchen. Keep in mind that if I had leaned back on my chair, I could see into the farther side of the kitchen, where the door that led to the deck was, which had this huge window right next to the door, so I turned on my movie and started to eat my breakfast as my dog trotted over to me and sitting next to me. I believe I was about maybe 45 minutes into the movie when my dog had switched her spot, now sitting right under the archway that led to the kitchen, staring at who knows what. But I felt her move. I didn't really think anything of it, to be honest. I mean, if it was serious, she would have been barking like anything. Maybe about 10 to 20 minutes go by and I glance over at my dog, noticing that she's still staring at something. This time though, I heard sort of, like shuffling or scratching over the kitchen. I called out her name, but she just wouldn't move. So when I had walked over, I followed her trail of vision and noticed that she was staring at the window in the kitchen that leads to the deck of the house. And I nearly wet myself when I saw something or somebody behind the window outside peeping through the blinds. I forgot to mention too that there was a chair on the deck right under that specific window, so whatever the heck that was had to have been balancing on the chair to look inside. It looked bald almost though, and white with pinkish tone. It had been holding onto the window frame, peering at my dog and I, while scratching the screen on the window with this horrible heavy breathing. I remember thinking in the moment that it was a person trying to break in, because whatever it was wanted to get in so desperately. The thing was sort of small though, and it seemed as if it didn't want me to see the rest of its face almost, only its eyes. This whole time my dog had been watching whatever this thing was and not barking. I'm saying this because something as simple as dropping a cup will send my dog into a fit, barking like crazy. Even a voice coming from the TV would cause a great couple of minutes of barking from her sometimes. So this behavior was truly unlike her. Now, as I said, I believed someone was trying to get in, so I ran over to the couch in the living room, shaking my mother awake and bringing her to the kitchen. And of course, whatever the heck it was had simply disappeared at this point. I would have thought that I was losing my mind too if my dog hadn't have been seeing the same thing as me. I peered out another window, checking the driveway in case it was a person and they had drove a car here or something, but there was nothing of the sort. My mother went out onto the deck and looked around, but there was nothing there, except fingerprints on the window frame. We checked through the whole yard and nothing was found except for the prints, but I'm quite traumatized still to this day, knowing that whatever had been there was watching me for quite a while and I didn't even know. And also the fact that if it was a person, it would take a while to get off of the land. Even if they tried running away, we should have caught them, because the yard is quite huge. I'm not living in this house where this had happened anymore, thankfully. I have other weird experiences in that house, but those stories are for another day, and this one certainly takes the cake. I, a 15-year-old male, am a firm believer in ghosts and whatnot. I moved into my house when I was 8 years old, and it seemed like a normal house, but I don't know, I just felt like I'd been there before. I knew where and what everything was, and everything was just super familiar, even though I've never set foot in that house. A few months later, I also had dreams of me wandering the house. These dreams probably don't mean anything, but every couple of nights I would get a dream of me wandering the house, and they just felt like they took hours. In these dreams, I never felt alone too, and whenever I turned my head, I would see something peeking at me from like around the corner or around a door frame or something. The dreams, they eventually stopped after a while, but I don't know, I always felt like I just wasn't alone in a room. My dogs would bark at the corners in the house, and my older sister claimed to feel something living in her room. Weirdly too, nothing ever really happened in the house until a couple of years ago. When I was 13, I always thought that I heard whispering whenever I was alone in the house. I've always been paranoid, so I thought that it was just in my head. But then I saw shadows when no one was around. Objects like balls would roll on their own. I thought that it was just the wind moving them, but the dogs would come up and bark at something next to the ball. Other objects would be in a different place too, like a stuffed animal or a TV remote. I also heard running and footsteps sometimes, always running to my location in the house, which was weird. I would try and tell my family about, well, all this stuff, but only my older sister believed me. The stuff that I was seeing never really happened to her, but she could also feel something in her room at times. But one of the weirdest things happened when I moved into the room downstairs. The room in our basement is the biggest room in our house, and since I'm the last kid living at home, my parents decided to give it to me. There's a back door down there that connects to a dog area that I always keep locked because it makes me feel safe. Sometimes I'll exit through that door to pick up dog poop or something different. Most of the time, though, I'll lock the door back up, but perhaps like maybe a dozen times I've forgotten. When I do forget to lock the door and I'm getting ready to go to sleep, I'll always hear this sort of tapping noise though. The tapping only happens when the door is unlocked, mind you. And at first the tapping sounds like it's sort of outside, but when I get up and I go to the door to investigate, it sounds like the tapping is coming from somewhere else. When I lock the door, the tapping stops immediately. I don't know if this is some reminder telling me to lock the door or something else entirely, but it definitely freaks me out, that's for sure. Keep in mind too that most of this stuff happens when I'm always alone. It only ever happens to me, and if I am with someone and I hear whispers or footsteps, nobody else seems to be able to hear it. I don't know if this is something friendly or something malicious, but it hasn't hurt anyone yet. But if it is, either it's targeting me since I'm the only one that this happens to, or something else is going on. I do know that this house is fairly new and has only ever had one other family in it, but no one that lived in it has died or anything. My sister says that it could be the ghost of my biological dad. I'm adopted and he passed away when I was a baby, but I don't know. I don't think that it's him. But if you have any thoughts about this whole ordeal, any sort of info on this would be much appreciated. Sometimes I also wonder if, I don't know, maybe I'm going crazy. So just a bit of quick backstory. I grew up in Providence, RI, and everyone who's lived there knows that it's a very busy and noisy place all day. The RIPTA buses, traffic, businesses everywhere. But at night it gets very quiet, and even very eerie sometimes. This story is about an incident that happened to me when I was 15 and I got my first job at McDonald's. So I was 15, like I said, and I just got hired down the street from where I live. It was perfect because I could get to and from work without worrying about getting a ride from my parents. And while working there, I met some kids my age that I became close with. Unfortunately, they weren't the greatest friends of all. They were very rebellious, they would clown around at work, act disrespectful to customers, Typical sort of 90s punks, if you catch my drift. Slowly, too, I started to become like them. I began disrespecting my parents, which was totally not like me, but I was always the nerd that didn't have many friends, so I wanted to fit in. Side note too, I was very sheltered growing up, and didn't really get around much because my parents were very overprotective of me. But anyway, one night at around, I would guess 10 p.m, I finished watching Monday Night Raw and went downstairs to grab something to eat. I opened the fridge and heard my dad's footsteps. He wore those slippers that sort of tap loudly on the tile floor. "Chris, I've asked you all day to take out the trash. They come tomorrow, so do it now." Now, normally, I would have taken it out the first time that he asked me, but now that I was getting older and becoming, well, a bit of a smart aleck, I didn't think it should be my responsibility anymore. "I work now and I go to school. You take it out," I replied. My dad's eyes got wide as I had never spoken to him this way before. He leaned in and said softly, "As long as you live here, you will help out. Now take out the trash or leave." I called his bluff, and rather than just simply taking the trash out, I rebelled like the dumb teen that I was. "Fine, I'll leave. You're going to kick me out for that? Don't bother looking for me. I'm done living in this stupid house," I said, as I opened the door and slammed it. I walked towards McDonald's to see if any of my friends were there, and they weren't, just the maintenance guy finishing up the cleaning. And of course, of all nights, it was raining, so I had to go and find somewhere to go and stay dry. There was a bridge with an overpass a little ways down the street that I knew of, so I started walking towards it. The whole time I'm regretting what I did, and I wish that I had just taken out the stupid trash. But I finally get to the bridge and I climb up the hill to the little section in the corner to stay at a view. I remember in school learning to go here in case of a tornado, so I knew that it was safe. I patiently and stubbornly waited, assuming that my parents would call the cops, which in my mind would show me that they cared. An hour goes by and nothing. No sirens, no cars were even on the road. It was getting pretty cold though, but I promised myself that I wouldn't give in. I crossed my arms over my legs and eventually I must have fallen asleep. But then I woke up violently from a semi-wailing on his horn over the overpass. I sort of looked around all confused. How long was I out for? I looked towards the McDonald's and saw an old man in a grey suit sitting at the bus stop. It was weird too. He was sitting still, facing forward. I assumed it must have been like 5 a.m. since he was waiting for the bus at this point. So I stood up, very upset that my parents never tried to find me, and began walking to the bus stop. Now, I'm a pretty outgoing person and I trust my gut. And as I walked closer to this old guy, I didn't get any negative vibe as I approached him. He slowly turned his head and looked at me and smiled. Not a creepy or uncomfortable smile, a sort of genuine peaceful one, I guess. I smiled back and decided instead of going home that maybe I can vent to this guy and get some advice. I asked if he minded if I sat down. He smiled again and gestured towards the seat. "Is everything okay?" he said with concern. "Yeah, I just ran away from home. My parents don't respect me anymore and how much I do all day," I said. I began telling him the story, and I noticed as the time went by that he was becoming more and more anxious, and his smile began turning into a frown. He began to start breathing loud, and eventually he even cut me off dead and said, "You need to go home now," with a really stern voice. Obviously, I was really confused by that. I figured that maybe his bus was coming soon and he wanted to say that before he left. I looked down in sort of frustration because that's not what I wanted to hear. Suddenly, though, I felt a strong grasp on my arm. He grabbed me and looked me dead in my eyes. His eyes were terrifying at this point too, bloodshot and wide, and I was shaking in fear, totally thrown off guard by his complete switch in his persona. He was literally shaking like he was afraid of something. He kept looking down the street and then back into my eyes and, "You need to go home now," he screamed at me. At this point, this guy was starting to scare me, so I stood up and nodded and he let go of my arm. Nervously, I started walking back to my house. I figured that my mum was already making some coffee, so my plan of sneaking back into the house and hiding in the basement was not going to happen. And just to see if she would be up, I looked at my watch, and it was then that I realized that it was only 1:30 in the morning. My heart stopped and my throat became dry, because why was that man at the bus stop at 1:30 in the morning when the buses aren't even running? I turned back towards him to look at him, but when I did, he was gone. Now I'm scared, confused, and I needed to get home. I used my spare key to get into the house eventually, and I opened the door quietly. Everyone was asleep. I slowly opened the basement door and made my way downstairs to the storage area in the back. I buried myself under the bags of clothes so that they wouldn't find me. I figured that I could get some sleep there, but the image of that guy kept popping in my head, and I was just so freaked out by it, because it just made no sense. As I was sort of shifting around getting comfortable, just then I began to hear loud sirens passing by, and not just one, two, but multiple bursts of sirens, coming every 10 seconds or so. I smiled, thinking that I'd won. My parents called the police to look for me after all. My plan had worked. And now I'll make them worry until the morning and regret kicking me out. I made myself a little bed and covered myself up to stay hidden and fall asleep. I woke up in the morning to hearing my mother sobbing upstairs. I looked outside the little basement window and saw daylight, so I figured that I'd go upstairs and get my apology at this point. I opened the basement door and walked into the kitchen. My mother was sitting at the dining table with her head in her arms. She immediately looked up at me and gasped. She stood up and ran over to me and hugged me more tightly than she ever had. "I thought you were dead," she muffled into my jacket. I slowly pulled away and looked at her confused. "What? Why would you think that?" I asked. What she said next genuinely sent chills throughout my entire body. She said that last night at around 1:40 in the morning, a drunk driver crashed into the bus stop in front of the McDonald's. It was allegedly completely destroyed. I started breathing heavy and realized that that man at the bus stop, he had saved my life. If he didn't tell me to leave when he did, I would have been sitting there for sure and I would have been killed. So many emotions were running through me. I didn't know how to handle it, so in the end I just hugged my mother and I immediately began to cry too. I apologized and realized that I missed the old me. In fact, I almost got myself killed from my own stubborn stupidity. I dropped those friends and I got into a new crowd at school at that point. And from that point on, anytime the trash was full, I was happy to take it out. Now, I don't know who or what that was at the bus stop, but whoever you are, thank you for saving my life that night. Whether it was just a lucky coincidence or right place, right time kind of thing, all I know is that if it wasn't for him telling me to go home at that point, I would have been sitting on that bench for the rest of that night. So, I don't know how this happened, and I'm still very perplexed by it 5 years later. But I was starting out in practice as a healthcare provider in a private practice. Our practice had set up cameras to monitor front desk activity outside hallway for security and emergency reasons, as we're in a large metro area with moderate to high crime rates. So, utilizing a very well-known yellow booking software, some will know, I received an appointment request. The appointment request had no insurance listed, only a name. It was JD for short. The appointment is never confirmed via phone, and JD had an international number. JD shows up, and for the most part it was a standard visit, normal workup, etc. Think of it as an unusual physical, but without abnormalities. I did my usual banter, what do you do for work, where are you from, etc, etc. They were pretty blunt and short in answering, and again, given the location where the practice was, I was not taken aback by this by any means. I will say though that I was confused about the lack of accent that this individual had. It seemed pretty standard for the area, yet where they claimed to be from wasn't how they sounded. There were no distinctive markings or features other than the person's height, which was well above average for every sex. But the appointment ends and they pay in cash and make no follow-up. The standard, don't call me, I'll call you sort of thing. The day was pretty busy though, so I wasn't able to do the note then and there, and so at the end of the day I sat down to do my notes and noticed that JD was not in the note tally, meaning that there was one patient missing from the total. So I checked the system thinking that the FD might have, forgotten since it's a cash note. These tend to not be as pressing to smaller practices as they do not need to submit this to insurance companies for reimbursement. But when I checked, the appointment was just not there. So I decided to check the booking app to pull their info up, but the appointment was not there either. So I asked the front desk what happened, and they said that they didn't know what or who I was referring to. Now, we had seen over 50 people collectively that day, so obviously I just let it slide. I did the note, but did not add any info other than the one told me by the patient, and I made note of the international number but couldn't remember the code. But flash forward to maybe 2 or 3 days later, I was still thinking about the situation and remembered the cameras. So I told the front desk to look at the video with me. I just needed to know that I wasn't crazy. And to my astonishment, there, clear as day, is the patient talking to me in the hallway and checking out in the FD, with the FD writing the transaction on both the cash ledger and the digital ledger. Needless to say, all three of us were and still are very confused by this. The FD did some snooping, as young people tend to do, found no record of anything or anybody by what they thought was their name. We called the booking company and nobody had made an appointment for that day, at least under my profile. So how did the appointment disappear from both our EHR and the booking software of all things too? I'm still rattling my brain over this, and any takers of explaining this, is this a glitch or is this something weird? This happened a while ago now, but I've heard a lot of stories here, and they always make me think of this encounter because I guess they're so similar. A friend and I, 22-year-old female at the time, attended Outsidelands in San Francisco back in 2021. This incident didn't actually happen at Outsidelands, but at the Airbnb my friend and I were staying at in Oakland. I am originally from California, and I know that Oakland can be a little sometimes, but accommodations for that weekend were pretty scarce by the time that we got around to getting our tickets and plans together. The neighborhood and particular place seemed nice enough overall, and to be honest, it probably was. Neither of us lived in California at this time, but we really enjoyed travel and road trips, so we decided to drive to the festival. Not only do I have out-of-state plates, but I also feel that at the time my car gave off a potentially solo female traveler vibe. I have since worked on toning it down a bit when traveling, so I can get a bit more inconspicuous, I guess. but after the second night of the festival, my friend and I got back to the Airbnb pretty late, around 1 in the morning, and I was having trouble sleeping, so I decided to go out to my car to smoke and call my boyfriend and whatnot. I've been sitting in my car for maybe 5 minutes when I see a car pull up and park behind my car. This was all street parking in a residential neighborhood, so at first I thought that it would have been a neighbor or something. But another few minutes passed before I realized that the car was still on and nobody had ever gotten out of it to go into a house or whatever. At this point, I began to feel a bit uneasy. Luckily, I was still on the phone with my boyfriend. Initially, he and I agreed to that since the entrance to the Airbnb couldn't be more than, say, 10 feet from where I was sitting in my parked car, I should just run inside real quick and make sure to lock the door. So I went to open my driver's door to get out, and I haven't even gotten 1 foot out of the car when I see the car that was parked behind me start to pull forward, but not all the way out into the road to leave. I immediately got super uneasy at that, and was legitimately scared in a way that I quite haven't felt before. I too thank my lucky stars every single day for this feeling, because I immediately got back into the car, locked my doors, and sped off pretty quickly. I spent the next half hour driving around Oakland, making sure that nobody was following me, and after I was sure that I wasn't being followed, I went back to the Airbnb. The car that had parked behind me earlier was now gone. I was definitely relieved and felt safe to go inside and go to sleep, but I also felt sad and uneasy because I knew that whoever was in the car couldn't have had great intentions. That much is clear. I did let the owner of the Airbnb know of this situation, and I learned my lesson about going out to my car alone at night in certain areas. I've also seen this book mentioned here in the comments, but I wanted to mention that I'm currently reading The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, which talks a lot about things like intuition, trusting your gut, and knowing when things are out of place. This particular memory has come up a lot for me recently when reading this book, and I guess the moral of the story here is trust your gut. I'm a new mum, and my daughter just means the world to me. This happened when she was almost 1 year old. We were in the fruit or veggie sections of Fred's. It had been a normal day. Some people waved at her, some smiled, a few others sent kind words her way. My daughter was enjoying interacting with passerbys as she normally did. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I see a man trying to communicate with my daughter. He made sounds loud enough to get her attention, but quiet enough that I wouldn't hear. I only saw because he was making some weird sort of kissy face at her as he did it. Something about it too just felt terribly off. Usually people will interact with her while making it very obvious to me, but this guy was making an effort to stay just out of my eyesight while keeping his eyes on my daughter. I'd never experienced anything like this before. I was alone and unsure of what to do, so I just left that section of the store and tried to forget about it. Later on, checking out, I saw once more that man. He was right behind me in the checkout lane next to mine. But the freakiest thing was that he was staring, wide-eyed with a blank expression at my daughter. I froze, and I recall the lady checking me out asking me if someone was making me uncomfortable. It was pretty hard to miss what this guy was doing, but I was so shaken up I just couldn't get the words out. She called an escort for me, and an employee walked us to the car as I manically scanned the rows of the cars, looking for this guy anywhere. He loaded my car up as I buckled in my daughter, and patiently waited until I locked my doors and drove off to go back inside. Now, perhaps I was just overthinking things, but I don't know. That sense of horror is something that I'll never forget. and something was telling me that something was wrong. So, I believe that I've only ever really had one paranormal experience, and it was when I was 10 and spent the night at a friend's house. I wasn't super close with this girl, so I only ever stayed the night once. She was a relative of my neighbor who was a family friend. But anyways, her and her mum were aware that their house was haunted. The story that the girl told me was that a 14-year-old boy was apparently murdered on the staircase. There was a cold spot on that stairs that her dog would always lay on, and I felt the difference in temperature myself when I moved my hand from one side of that stair to the other. I tried to Google a news story or something recent to substantiate that story, but could never find anything. But I also don't know how long ago it would have been when it happened, so I could have just not been looking in the right places. She also showed me, though, that when you would open her bedroom door, which opened inward into the room, a cold burst of air would come back at you, which I felt like I felt at the time that she showed me too. Another thing that often occurred in their home was the TV changing channels by itself, and even the voices of people talking would change. When I was there, the TV channels did actually change by themselves, but the voice thing didn't happen. I don't believe she was messing with me too with the channel changing, because she didn't have the remote in her hand or anything. But the next part was the main aspect of the whole paranormal experience that has really stuck with me throughout the years. I should mention too that I'm 23 now. So the next day after spending the night there, I was sitting in the living room talking to her and her mum, and in between the dining room and the living room, there was a shelf that was built into the wall that I was sitting perpendicular to, and this plastic duck figurine was sitting on the shelf when, all of a sudden, it literally flew off the shelf and hit the wall in front of it. It was honestly as if someone had just smacked it off the shelf, and it definitely didn't just fall. I was absolutely gobsmacked, while her mum was just like, "Oh yeah, that's the ghost," and they were both completely not fazed by it. It's also worth noting too that my aunt lived in the same house prior to them living there, and also claimed that the house was haunted too, although I don't really remember what she had told me about her experiences. I don't see her very often, but the next time that I do, I think that I'd like to ask her more about it. I haven't had any significant experiences that I would claim to be paranormal since then, and I'm kind of curious as to why not, but I am a firm believer in the paranormal, just from this one night in that house. So, I've always had incredibly weird paranormal experiences throughout my life, but this one definitely tops the charts. It unnerves me, even to this day. I moved to Texas, but I had to fly to Utah to pick up my car. It's February of 2020, and I leave Utah at approximately 6 p.m. with a friend who flew with me. We decided that we'd spend the night in Albuquerque, so we could get some sleep, and we'd arrive there at around 4 a.m. So we're driving, things are fine, and you have to pass through a reservation to get to the main highway for Albuquerque, and something felt just off from the second that we entered into New Mexico. It's maybe 2 or 3 in the morning at this point, and my friend was fast asleep with her head against the window while I played the music loudly. We had to drive slowly as the speed limit was only like 35 or 45 here, and as we got further into the reservation, I heard a sharp knock on the roof of my car. It was hard enough to be clearly heard over the music. My friend was even startled awake and asked what happened. I shrugged it off. I didn't want to stop. This might have been intuition as well, but I'd rather have rock damage or drive on a flat tire or anything else than stop on that road. It was dark and something just felt wrong. Now, I had really absurdly bright LED headlights on my car, and as such, I could see a few miles ahead of where my car was going. My friend was watching the road, and I slowed down to get a better look while I was still a good distance away. But what I saw, it still freaks me out to this day. The best way that I could describe it was a body of a human, sort of half contorted downward. The hair and the head were upside down, and its arms were like large stalactite-looking things. That thing was so dark as well that my headlights couldn't even penetrate it. However, it illuminated everything around it. Its face wasn't looking at us originally, but it sort of twisted its head to look around at us. It didn't have facial features, but it looked sort of distorted, like it had broken a jaw or something, and it was almost, sort of blurry, I guess. I pride myself on my somewhat photographic memory, but it was like it didn't even want me to see it. At this point, we're no more than 50 to 75 feet away, and I just step on it. My friend asks if I saw that, and I nodded my head. I didn't even want to talk about it, if I'm being honest. I didn't even want to breathe. I was just shaking so badly because it felt ominous, evil, in fact. I can't even put my finger on it to explain in full detail the fear that I felt, but it was like it penetrated to my bones. It was a primal instinct to run as fast as I could away from whatever this thing was. I told her not to look back because we don't want it to follow us, and I swear that I drove a solid 120 until I got off the reservation. We didn't end up stopping in Albuquerque either. I just drove all the way to Lubbock instead, and we spent the night there. My work asked for paranormal stories, and I told this once. A coworker mentioned putting it on here because she thinks that you guys might like it. Anyway, that's it for my story, and I guess I just want to add as well that I reached out to my friend, and it turns out that they were awake that entire time. They just had their head resting against the window, so it wasn't like we were mistaken regarding what we saw. So I've never really made a post or anything on a story like this, but I've always wanted to share this. At the time that it happened, I did tell my flatmates, but I left out certain details, not wanting to seem like a weirdo to them. I've had a handful of strange experiences throughout my life, but most have been more subtle than what I'm about to share. This happened sometime between 2012 and 2014. I would have been in my late 20s at the time, living in a share house in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I worked nights packing shelves at a supermarket, a job I absolutely hated, but had kept up all through uni, and it got me through. In fact, I'd actually graduated in early 2012, but found I was too lazy to just quit. I ended up spending those last few years in the share house kicking around, working this terrible dead-end job, waiting for everyone to go their separate ways so my life could start. After each shift, I'd catch the bus home from work at around 11 p.m, get off at the top of the hill at the shops, and then walk down the hill towards my home. It was only about a 10-minute walk home from the bus stop, and I only mention all these details because I probably caught that bus and made that same walk 1,000 times in all the years that I held that job. But this was the only time anything even remotely creepy happened. So, I'd hopped off the bus and was headed downhill with the cemetery on my left and a row of simple 1- and 2-story homes on my right. I almost never saw any people at this time of night, and that's how quiet the area was. The way is also well lit, and despite a cemetery looming over your shoulder, there's really nothing eerie about it. In fact, it's quite beautiful, really. A well-tended cemetery filled with interesting old markers, statues and things. You'd see people jogging or walking through it most days. The cemetery's bordered by a sandstone wall that follows the way downhill, then left along this coastal road that sort of loops back around almost. Anyway, I was maybe halfway down the hill when a plain white van drove past on my left. At first, I didn't really think anything of it, to be honest. I didn't brake pace, and the van didn't stop or slow as it went past. I watched the taillights grow small, sweeping left as it took the bend at the bottom of the hill. But as soon as it disappeared, I had this, really odd feeling come over me that I was going to see it again. I'm really not sure how else to describe that, but it wasn't like a voice in my head or anything, just an odd fleeting impression that when I get to the bottom of the hill, that the same white van would be waiting for me. So I got to the bottom, turned left, and saw a pair of headlights coming back towards me. They were too far to see if it was the same car, but immediately I just knew that it was. I didn't feel scared or anything, but I knew that whatever was about to happen was going to happen, whether I wanted it to or not. Again, just a fleeting impression. This time, the van slowed and came to a stop at the side of the road. There was a young driver. I can't remember whether the passenger side window was already open or whether he leaned over to open it, but either way, he leaned across and called to me to come over. All I thought in that moment was that he probably just needs directions. But as I approached, I immediately began to feel very uneasy. That gentle impression that I'd felt earlier, watching the van drive past, now solidified into a vague feeling of dread. I felt as if I shouldn't get too close, so I came about as far as the grassy verge and stopped. I remember the radio in the car was playing, just some random pop song. He might have reached over and turned it down, I really can't remember, but I also don't remember too much of what he looked like. Except that he was maybe about my age, or maybe a little bit older, had longish blonde hair and a few days' growth on his face. He didn't strike me as threatening, so the unease that I felt was more confusing at first, I guess. But he did speak with a British accent, and I just assumed he was a traveller. "Excuse me," he said. "Can you help me? I'm trying to get to the cemetery." Now, I was really confused. I mean, just over his shoulder on his right, less than 20 feet away, the tops of grave markers and crypts poked above the sandstone wall. Like I said, the way was well lit, and he would have definitely seen the cemetery as he drove this road a moment before. In fact, he'd driven down to the far end of it, then made a U-turn. That's when I'd seen him coming back, and so at the other end, where the road loops around the coast, the wall wasn't high at all, and you could clearly see all the graves, even in the dark, stretching back up to the hill. In other words, it just made no sense. I was about to answer as well when my blood absolutely ran cold. I froze mid-word, my mouth hanging open, because somewhere in the back of the van, I could clearly hear a woman screaming and crying for help all of a sudden. I could even hear her banging against the inside paneling. I heard it clear as day over the radio playing. I knew it wasn't a recording, but it was also somehow strange and seemed slightly unreal to me. Again, not too sure how to explain it, but I definitely heard it, and it scared the heck out of me, but I didn't react the way that I thought I would, I guess. I looked at him, and he just stared back and said nothing, making no effort to explain the screams or even acknowledge that we were hearing them. But there was no mistaking it. I could still hear it, clearly, as we just stared at each other. Sorry, I have no idea," was all I could get out in the end. He then nodded, said thanks anyway, and drove off. After that, I ran the rest of the way home, which thankfully was only 2 minutes away. When I got in, I was out of breath and shaking. My flatmates were all asleep, and I went straight to my room. If there had been even 1% of doubt in my mind, like maybe I'd imagined it, I would have probably woken someone first and at least told them what happened. But instead, I called the police. I had to explain the story to 2 different cops. Long story short, because of a jurisdictional thing, my area actually fell under a police station further away than the local one that I'd called. They took it seriously, thankfully, took all my details and said that they'd send a car to look for this van. Unfortunately, I hadn't seen the license plate number. In the moment, I hadn't even thought to check, stupidly I know, and my description of the driver wasn't much more detailed than what I've described here now, so that really wasn't much help either. Though they had my details, the police, they never called back to follow up, and nothing showed up in the news or any newspapers. When I told my flatmates about this, I left out the strange feelings of dread and just stuck to the details, I guess. But they mostly thought that I'd been pranked somehow, and while I guess that is possible, to this day, I know that that's not what happened at all. It's one of those you had to be there things, but the whole thing felt so unusual and didn't play out like any kind of prank. The whole event lasted not even 3 minutes from when he first drove past to when he drove off, and our interaction lasted probably not even 20 seconds, but it has stayed with me for years, and I often think about it, wondering what happened. Anyway, that's my story. Like I said, I've got a few others, but this one is the most dramatic, and I suspect that it's going to stay with me the rest of my life. So I'm 16 years old and I live in Italy. My house is in a little village on the biggest mountain in Europe, and there isn't much activity around here during the day. A very small amount of cars pass by. There usually is really no people around though. It's a very calm and cool place at the end. This event though, it took place last April. I had just gotten out of school after a 2-hour-long Latin test, and I was basically already sleeping at that point. I unlocked my bike, waved at my friends, and I left, taking the main road that led to the village that I live in. As always, there were no cars, no people, no nothing. I was tired, like I said, and while riding, I was thinking about the usual things a 15-year-old is thinking about when coming back from school. The should I do the homework first or video games kind of stuff. I was probably overthinking and kept going along the road without realizing that I didn't take the right-hand turn. I noticed my mistake maybe a few minutes later and thought, oh well, never mind, I'll just take the long way home. Because at the end of the road, you could sort of take a path that led to the village anyway. And while I didn't know yet, this was probably the worst mistake that I've made in my entire life. I kept going, and at that point the road was sort of winding through a little forest. All the trees above me had stopped the already small amount of light that was there, so it was basically dark at this point. I turned on the bike's flashlight and moved on to the right side of the road. Everything was quiet until I heard a car sound coming towards me. I was a bit surprised because, as I already said, there was basically no car activity in the area, especially at this time of day. I didn't panic, after all, it was just a car passing by. After a while, I saw the headlights approaching from the road. The car was still pretty far away and was going at a slow pace, almost as if the driver was looking for something. Then the car sped up and, to my surprise, turned right to get in front of me. Confused and not wanting to get hit by a vehicle, I turned left to bring the bike on the other side of the road. But then the car did the same thing and sped up even more. I had very little time now to realize what was happening because the car was coming at full speed towards me and I was about to be hit. So I did the first thing that came to my mind and I jumped off the bike on the right side of the road. I did it just in time as well because the car ran over the empty bike just a few seconds after I jumped. I sat on the asphalt, my knees and elbows burning now from the fall, trying to comprehend what had just happened, when I saw the driver of the car getting out of the vehicle. The guy was now on the side of the road, running towards me, not saying a word. I got up as fast as I could, but the guy managed to grab my left arm. I screamed, turned around, landed the strongest punch that I could possibly take on this guy's nose. The guy didn't flinch though. I let go of my arm, touched his now bleeding nose, and just smiled at me. before simply running back into the car, starting the engine again, and leaving. I stood there in complete shock. I grabbed what was left of my bike and I just ran home as fast as I could. I was so scared and confused that I even left my backpack in the middle of the road that day and had to go back the next day to get it. And as crazy as that whole 30 seconds or so was, that was it. I never figured out who this guy was, why he tried to run me over with his car like that, or anything. This is by far the most terrifying and most close to death in my life that I've ever been to, and I can tell you that I never did take that road again. I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day clearly too, because it was the first time that I was ever allowed to walk to school and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place. Everybody knew everyone. If you thought that you could get away with something, then you needed to be prepared to have your ear abused by the time that you got home. But there was one day though. It was a cold winter day and school unfortunately was still open, so all the neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-high inches of snow just to get to school. It took me longer to leave the house as I was used to walking with my older sister to school since she knew the routes better than me. I always used to make fun of her for being paranoid and taking a different route every day from school, but after that day, I learned that that was what saved my life in the end. As I was waiting by the door to leave, my mum came up to me and told me that I should ride with her to drop me off because my sister was too sick to go today, and being a brat, I made a big deal about walking by myself because I was almost 12 years old and all my friends' parents let them walk alone and all that. She looked at me for a long while, then told me to make sure that I pay attention to cars. I got hit by a car and almost died when I was 9, so the worry that showed on her face was well warranted. I hurriedly nodded though and headed out the door to go to school. My sister didn't like to dilly-dally, so she was always in a rush to get to school early, but seeing as it was just me, I thought that it would be a good idea to take my time. I would play in the brown slush that was left on the side of the road and even make funny-looking snowballs to see how far I could throw them. Halfway to school, I then noticed a white van following behind me at some point. Being the playful child that I was, if I had not been bending down to make another snowball, I probably wouldn't have noticed it slowly creeping up the street. I told myself that I was being stupid, but continued more hurriedly to school upon seeing it. Once I got to school, I took a quick glance over my shoulder and saw the van a few feet behind me. It wasn't until I got onto the school grounds that it drove away fast by me. I thought that that would be the end of it, to be honest, but throughout the day when I would stare out the window, the van would always be there. I think I assumed that it never really left, just parked or something. Many adults would try to convince me years later that maybe it wasn't the same one, but I knew that it was. This van had a bright yellow smile emoji sticker on it that you could spot from anywhere. I couldn't see who was in the van, but through the tinted glass, I knew that they could see me. It was now the end of the day, and I wasn't ready to go home, but it was too late to call my mum because she was at work and my sister was home sick, like I said. So I had to suck it up and start walking home. I tried to blend in with a group of kids, but most of them were car riders and the others didn't live near me. Remembering what my sister told me, I took another route home. I didn't memorize this route clearly, but I decided anything was better than being spotted by that van. I made it to my main street, but realized my mistake too late. The route that I took led back to the main street where I walked to school, and hidden behind a row of cars was the white van with the same smiley emoji sticker. I tried to stay calm and walk past it, but once I heard the van door silently click open, I ran. I could hear the rush of 2 pairs of heavy footfalls behind me. They were getting closer, so I did what any normal kid would do. I cut corners. I cut into someone's backyard until I was directly inside of my house and forced myself into the thick snow to make it to the door. My heart was racing, not because I was running, but because I could still hear them behind me. I made it to the door and banged with all my might until someone came to the door. My sister looked confused, but one look at my face and she pulled me inside and locked the doors. The van, it came around and was still outside. Truthfully, it stayed out there as well until finally my brother got home. Me and my sister, we didn't talk about it, but we both knew how close it was to me going missing that day. I hadn't thought about this incident in years, to be honest, but one of my hometown friends showed me an article that came out in 2013. Apparently, some man kidnapped and assaulted a girl my age, and it wouldn't have scared me if it hadn't have mentioned the white van with that same sticker. Whoever they were, they had definitely attempted to kidnap me and do God knows what else to me that day. This story happened 3 years ago when I was 15 in my village. I really don't tell this story much too because, well, people tend to think that I'm making it up. But I've been thinking about it quite a lot this week and, I don't know, I just feel like I need to tell some people. So my village is located in a pretty rural area that is protected by the government because it's been considered a natural paradise for like the last 30 years. This means that exploration in this area is quite difficult nowadays, since it's forbidden to cut down trees, which means that it's a huge forest. I was spending my summer there, and my favorite thing to do was hiking, and although I had never gone alone in the woods, just roads with people, my grandma had told me that cleaning services had opened and rehabilitated a path that had been covered in bushes and trees for like the last 30 years because of a race that was being prepared, like runners and stuff. Usually I would go to the nearest town, 1 hour away by foot, by the only way that I knew, the road, and on my way back from seeing friends there, I decided to take the new path that my granny said was safe, alone. But that was a pretty big mistake. So the first part of the path was the easiest, just too many obstacles and landslides, but it was nothing compared to the rest. The second part was a hill full of rocks that was the hardest thing to get up. I literally had to climb on like 4 legs like a dog, and when I got to the top I looked around and even found some animal bones as well. I didn't pay much attention to it since the area is known for its big population of wolves and bears that go out at night. I continued my way faster than before. This part was plain floor where the woods really began, so it was a big relief until I got to a sort of dead end. There were some huge trees that had fallen exactly on a row on the path, and it was impossible to cross them. This seemed really off to me as well because there were no other fallen trees. And the weirdest part, aside from those trees, there was also a little barn there. Yeah, a barn, in the middle of the woods. I thought to myself that it was probably abandoned. It looked like it. So I decided to throw my bag into the little field that belonged to the barn, and then I crossed the fence. I crossed it running without realizing the most bizarre thing, that the field had no trees in it. It was completely clear. No bushes, no big plants, nothing. It really shouldn't be like that if it was abandoned. I started feeling concerned about how the location of the fallen trees was so coincidental, how there casually was a barn beside with a clear field when the path had been closed for like 30 years. The whole thing just seemed really off. I went on though, and luckily I was reaching the last hill my grandma had described, the one that connected with the village. And suddenly, there was complete silence in all the woods, which allowed me to hear some branches cracking behind me. I thought to myself that it must have been a bird or something, but then they came closer, and they really sounded like footsteps. After trying to convince myself that it was probably just an animal, I was so afraid that I couldn't look back. I started walking faster, and guess what? So did the footsteps. I started running after noticing that, and so did the footsteps again. I was running for my life at this point, when suddenly I started hearing incredibly loud grunts. Everything was going really fast. Luckily, I got to my village in a minute or so after that. I was really close. I got onto the patio of the first house that I could find, closed the door. It was a relative's house, no need to call the police. I stayed there for like 10 minutes until I got my breath back, and then I went back home. I really don't know what that was, but I get chills just remembering that place. Not having a signal on my phone in the middle of nowhere and the grunts. It makes me think too that there was something following me that day, since the barn and the trees were just a distraction to slow me down. I never went into the woods alone after that, and I don't intend to ever again either. We all make dumb decisions in life, right? Well, in this case, I was stupid. Very stupid. You see, I arranged to meet a guy off Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving and stuff, I arranged for him to pick me up outside of my place. I had been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but that is not redeemable, and I know that. The choice that I made on this day could have ended me, but thankfully, I'm still around to tell the tale. So the guy picked me up in his car and told me that he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought great. He put in the name of the restaurant into his GPS and we were off, making pleasant conversation on the way there until I started seeing woods when I looked out my window. I felt very confused. I mean, we were supposed to be going into town, not into the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Fear hit me hard then. He said, "I swear the GPS is taking me through here. I didn't choose this path." I said, "Please, just get us back to civilization." My eyes were wide and I must have looked like a deer in the headlights. His face was really apprehensive, so he must have known that I was scared. Oh my goodness was all I was thinking to myself. I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere public. Or better yet, not met this guy at all. What was I thinking? I'm going to get murdered here in these woods. I tried checking my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS, and that's when he said those spine-chilling words. "There's no signal out here." I remember just thinking to myself to try to look calm. Don't let him think that you suspect that he's onto something. But man, did I feel terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold while I was simultaneously sweating. If he was going to kill me, part of me wanted him to get it over with so I wouldn't be left in so much anticipation. His forehead was perspiring and he kept saying, "I swear I'm not doing this. I'm trying to get us back en route to the sushi place." I then said, "Listen, I don't care about sushi anymore. Just get us to a gas station, anywhere with people at this point." He said, "I don't have a shovel or a weapon in my trunk or anything, if that's what you're thinking," which did little to calm my nerves. We finally reached the restaurant after what felt like an eternity. I'd never been so scared in my life, in fact. I didn't have much of an appetite, and I was physically trembling when we arrived. But I figured that he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it was safe now to continue with our date. I already planned on taking an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again. And I was shocked out of my mind when he then asked, "So, when do you think that we'll have sex?" I nearly choked on a piece of my food. What? I didn't know where this was coming from. I didn't know how he could ask me something like this now on our first date when he literally saw me pale as a ghost just moments ago. You know, like, how long will it take? A day? A week? A month? I stared at him, dumbfounded. I couldn't respond because I was just utterly speechless in that moment. "Well, I can't wait a whole month, I'm telling you that now," he said. I didn't say anything, and the rest of the date was insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home, and only seconds after my driver pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, he texted me to say that he doesn't think that it'll work out with me because he needs a girl with a higher libido. I didn't argue. I just texted back a simple, "Okay, ready to be done with this guy." When the Uber driver drove me home, he did not take me through the wilderness pathway of a potential murder site too. He took me home through streets, other cars, lights, the sweetest scene to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder too why my date had to take me through an hour drive through the wilderness to get to the restaurant, but it only took the driver 15 minutes to get me home from the same location. The whole thing was weird and chilling, and I don't know if my date planned on anything sinister and maybe he backed out, or if it was an honest mistake, but I'm glad that I made it out of there unscathed. I learned a tough lesson that night, one that I should have already known, but that I foolishly ignored for some reason. The moral of the story is that you shouldn't let strangers from dating apps pick you up in their cars.